If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
The creepiest, scariest, absolutely real paranormal and ghost sightings and experiences people have had in their lives that still give them goosebumps.
Cloaked figure my dad saw while hiking. I'm curious to see if anyone has any ideas on what he saw. My dad's an old school grumpy guy who isn't the type to tell lies about something like this. It happened at an old abandoned military base converted into a walking trail he's been walking on for the majority of his life. After this happened, he has not gone back. This took place in San Pedro, California. The figure looked to be about 7 feet tall, wearing a cloak and hat. When he saw it, he instantly got chills. He turned around for a minute, thinking about going back because he got a bad feeling, but decided he's not going to let some tweaker punk him out of a place he's been going to his whole life and pulled out his knife. As he continued down the trail, the figure vanished. I've heard of something similar to what he saw called a dark watcher. I'm not sure if what he saw was a dark watcher or something else, given the location. He eventually returned to the site with a friend who professes to possess the ability to perceive such phenomena. She got really freaked out, saying she's only seen something so evil one other time in her life. She asked him to never go back, and he hasn't been back since. I know that some satanic rituals occur in the bunkers there because my dad has found mutilated animals, which may be relevant to the situation. Any ideas? When I was a teenager, my mother was an RN. She had to work nights, a 12-hour shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Every night at around 12 a.m. I'd hear a tennis ball bouncing. My room was upstairs, and I'd look out my window, and an extremely strange-looking man would stand on the corner, staring up at it. When I'd peek out, I swear it always seemed he could see me. It only would happen on the nights my mother worked. I even called my aunt to come over a few times, but he was always gone by the time she would get there. This continued for months until finally one morning my mother came home and there was a tennis ball sitting on the coffee table. We have no idea how that ball got there. I was always extremely anal about locking doors, and the windows were sealed from years of paint. Needless to say, I refused to stay at home for the foreseeable future. I never again experienced seeing or hearing that man. I was always left feeling like he was more than just an evil man. It always felt as though he was aware of my presence at home and could see directly into my eyes. I was always left with a feeling of dread. Not understanding how he was able to get inside and leave me with his ball has left me feeling unsettled, and this incident happened 35 years ago. The worst part is I never truly felt like my family believed me. I always felt like they only humored me, believing I was just a young kid who didn't like being home alone at night. To this day I freaking hate the sound of a tennis ball being bounced. I was hiking Gettysburg with my husband and 2 kids, first time there. We went to Devil's Den, which was the place of the bloodiest battle. We had no clue, we just picked a spot. As we were hiking, it started to pour, so after a while we decided to leave. As we were walking down the trail, I was in the back, and someone came from behind and grabbed my shoulder, pulling me backwards. It felt like they were trying to stop me, like a parent stopping a kid from being hurt. I turned around to talk to the person, and there was no one there. Of course I was bewildered, so I looked up to see the tree branch I must have gotten caught on. Nothing. The trees were tall, the path wide, and there were no bushes, branches, people, or sticks to grab a hold of me. I froze for a split second, then yelled to my husband, "We need to get out of the woods faster." In recent years I've read it's the most haunted battlefield of Gettysburg, where people hear yelling, see apparitions, their electronics go dead, etc. This story was told by several family members. I remember I was about 12 the first time I heard it. From what I remember, the story is that at some time in the 1930s a family was traveling across the states trying to make their way to California. They didn't have a lot of money, so they would often just pull over and set up camp and sleep for the night. One stop they made was in a wooded area near the mountains. It was a desolate area, so they figured it would be safe to camp without being bothered. The family was in one large A-frame tent, and some of the kids slept in the car. During the night their daughter, a young girl, had to go pee, so she got out of the car and went to find a bush to pee behind. She heard screaming and loud banging noises. She was so frightened she stayed in place. After a while of sitting on the ground crying silently, she looked up over the bush and saw a man with an axe walking away from her and the family's campsite. He had an old-fashioned slouch hat and overalls. He just walked out of sight and disappeared into the woods. When daylight came, she crawled from behind the bush only to find that all of her family had been hacked to death. She was all alone out in the middle of nowhere. She ran away and started down the path and was eventually found and rescued. Fast forward to today, the 1980s, when it was told to me. Today the site is known for being haunted, Sometimes local hunters hear screaming in the middle of the night, and people see a little girl running. Also, if you dare to camp in the same location, the Axeman may come and get you. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night in a rainstorm. There was a guy walking along the side of the road away from us. I tell my brother to slow down. Maybe he needs help. We are miles away from the nearest place he could possibly be walking to. We pull alongside him, and as we pass him, I try to see his face. He literally disintegrated into thin air. My brother screams, "What the duck?" and hammers the gas. We drove in silence for about 30 minutes before he asked me, "Did that guy actually disappear in front of our eyes?" I think about this experience at least once a week, and it still freaks me out. When I was in 7th grade, I was camping in the woods behind my house with some friends. There were 3 of us in total. We were just chilling in the tent watching movies and telling stories. We played some soccer, and we played with the gardener's tools of axes and picks and stuff like that. At maybe 1 a.m. I saw a small light far back in the woods. I told my friends, and we decided to go check it out. We got the gardener's tools as weapons, and we headed out. We started walking, and no matter how far we walked or how deep we got, the light seemed to be still far away. We kept going, though, and eventually it seemed to be getting closer. We were really stupid and went way too far into the woods. We only had our flashlights, tools, and phones. I had my dad's old police flashlight, and we could see pretty far. Still, we never saw someone with a light as we expected. We thought maybe it was a reflection of some metal or something, so whenever we shone our light on it, we could barely see it. Finally we got closer and closer, but it was still pretty far. And the light disappeared. We got really scared we wouldn't be able to get back. We kept going, though. We had maybe been walking for 30 to 46 minutes, and the light was still gone. It finally reappeared again farther away. I was scared shitless, but I wouldn't show it. We were all tough, I guess. We kept walking, and eventually the light started to get taller. It then got over the trees and disappeared again. Honestly, I know this sounds dumb, but we were starting to think that we might have been lured into a trap. By kidnappers maybe. We heard footsteps on leaves all around us, and we got ready to fight. Then it went silent. We shined our lights all around and didn't see anybody. We headed back. When we got back, I looked at my phone. It was maybe 3 or 4 a.m. I had no idea how long we were gone. I've seen other alien stories with people who lose time. And think about this now. Maybe we were lured into a continuous movement so it would be easier to get us back? I swear I was awake the whole time and talking with friends. I've only told a few others this story, and of course my friends and I shared plenty of theories as to what happened. This was a while ago. Ask if you have questions. Oh, also, we used the Snapchat map to get back to my house. One of the scariest things I will never forget is when I was 11. I had a window behind my bed, and one night around 2 a.m. I was still awake watching TV, and outside my window I could hear things being kicked around. It sounded like cans being kicked around. So after I got enough courage, I looked out my window, and I saw a man in a dark hoodie. He was looking right back at me, and I was in shock. I couldn't move, I just stayed there staring at him. Then I found myself running out of my room to my parents' room. And I woke my mom crying, and I told her what happened. She woke my dad up and made him go outside with his gun and check around the house. He found footprints because it had rained earlier that night. So I ended up sleeping with my mother, and my father slept in my room for the rest of that night. However, the window in my room is nearly 7 feet off the ground, indicating that the man must have been tall. Which scared me so much because I thought it was Slender Man at that time. I had a big fear of Slender Man at that time because of the Slender Man stabbing, if you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that man scared the absolute shit out of me. A disembodied voice is messing with my siblings and me. I grew up in an early 1900s house in an old Indian town. Had many unexplained things happen there, the first of which happened as we were moving in. I was about 7 years old, and our family was moving in during the summer. There were still boxes to be unpacked, space to explore, and things to discover. My younger sisters, who were about 4 at the time, were playing hide and seek with me. My dad had run down to the gas station, and my mother was asleep with her door closed on the second floor. We had been playing on the first floor, and my one sister had picked a particularly good hiding place. I had found my other sister, and the two of us were looking for the third one. We walked through our living room and stepped into the vestibule area at the end of the room. "Sister, get over here." I tried to say it as authoritatively as my little 7-year-old voice would go. A voice came from all around us, in a sing-song, mocking fashion. "Sister, get over here." It repeated, as if making fun of me. My sister and I looked at each other with terror on our faces, and my other sister popped up from behind the couch looking scared. "Did you hear that?" No words were necessary as we all went sprinting out the front door and waited on the front lawn until my dad got home. He was unnerved, but we were shocked. Little did we know this would be the first of many spooky events to happen there. Next time I'll write about the demon eyes in the closet. Has anyone else ever had this happen? The voice was mocking me in a different tone, sounding different than my voice. We all heard it clear as day. No TVs were on, windows were open, and there was no logical explanation. I resided in a highly haunted house for nearly a decade, and one of the spirits was particularly malevolent. My oldest son is traumatized from the things he experienced there, stuff he didn't tell me about until we moved. I hardly talked about it, either, because I was worried I was going crazy. This continued until we moved, at which point all the activity ceased. Just stopped. But when we lived there, the activity was so constant, it got to the point where it was just irritating. It was like constant jump scares in a movie, you know? Eventually, it became less impactful. One of the things the ghost would do is climb into bed with me. I'd be lying in bed and hear the slap of a hand hitting the top of the covers, feel the mattress shake, and feel the weight of someone pulling themselves up onto the bed, and then I'd look, and no one would be there. Happened all the time. Toward the end of our time living there, after I had talked a lot about how much The Ring and The Grudge scare me, I was taking a nap and felt someone climb into bed. I just knew no one would be there. I knew my husband was downstairs and my kids were watching a show. But I couldn't help it. I rolled over and looked and saw a girl towering over me with a dirty, white dress and long, dirty black hair covering her face. I jumped, then rolled away, covering my face with my blanket, then groaned and yelled, "Go away." It sounds absurd, but it totally happened. And it did something like this to my oldest son, too, after he saw something on a show that scared him. I was just wondering if anything like this has happened to anybody else. What kind of entity is this? I'm thinking it has to be demonic, but there's so much I just don't know about these things. I was at a summer camp in a mountain village. Our group of kids was walking back down to the base. The area had once been full of hideouts for partisans during the Second World War. One of my two friends was a few meters ahead of me. We had spent a lovely afternoon together. She was a very cheerful, sporty girl, always smiling. Nothing ever seemed to discourage her, and I admired her for that. At one point, though, I saw her stop. I walked up to her, and to my surprise, she was crying hard, in real despair. I asked her what had happened, and she told me, "I saw a soldier across the river. He told me that something terrible is going to happen soon, and I'm scared." I couldn't see anyone when I turned to face the river that was flowing next to us. I tried to comfort her. When we reached the little wooden bridge, one of the girls in our group slipped and fell into a shallow but rocky part of the river. The drop was only 2 or 3 meters, so luckily she wasn't badly hurt, but she did break her ankle. That incident kept us awake the whole night, reflecting on how strange and unsettling such events can be. I have many memories, but this one has lingered in my mind for all these years, causing me distress. In 1991, at the age of 12, I experienced basketball season for our high school, which consistently advanced to the state championships held in Boise, Idaho. My family rarely attended such events, so my mother permitted me to travel with one of my close friends and her older sister, 17, her sister's boyfriend, 18, and her 2 younger brothers. Unfortunately, during the trip, her mother went on a drinking binge, and no one knew her whereabouts. She was missing in action. We were all at my friend's aunt's house, and since we needed to return to our town, her sister's boyfriend drove us back, which took 5 hours. As we drove through the mountains on a 2-lane highway surrounded by trees, we were all listening to music and talking when I looked out the van window and saw a creature running alongside us. It had pale white skin, the color of snow, and huge black eyes. It was bald or hairless, but its bottom half was that of a deer or something similar. We were going 65 to 70 miles an hour. I yelled to my friend, and she screamed, "It's running by the car." Shortly after she exclaimed that, it swiftly darted between the trees in the forest. All of us saw it except her sister and boyfriend because they were in the front seats, but we have never forgotten what happened or what it looked like. We were on Highway 95 a while after we passed McCall, Idaho. I still wonder what it was and how many more of them are roaming our mountains and forests. Creepy experience that still gives me chills. This happened around 12 noon. The only people in the house at the time were me, my nephew, and my grandparents, who were inside their bedroom. I was about to put my nephew to sleep when I suddenly heard a scream coming from the living room. The voice sounded exactly like my niece's, so I assumed they had already come home from daycare. I ignored it at first. After a while, I heard the scream again. My grandparents were startled, and I heard my grandmother tell my grandfather to go check which child was screaming. I started to get irritated, thinking, why isn't my sister telling her child to be quiet? So I went out and headed to the living room, only to find out that no one was there. A few moments later, my grandfather came out of the bedroom and asked me who was screaming. That's when I messaged my sister to ask where they were. She replied and said they were still at the daycare. I was told to go no further. Back in 2007, I was a fire investigator for a large paid fire department. We had a 4-alarm fire at a group of 6 large buildings that were built in the early 1900s. Heavy timber and brick construction, with each being 7 to 9 stories tall. For years the floors were cleaned with an oil-based chemical, so these buildings were essentially one big matchstick. The fire came in around 2 in the morning. The fire was stopped after it destroyed 3 of the 6 buildings. Later in the afternoon the investigators, were having a meeting on site when a captain from one of the engines came up to us and said that when he was looking for a fire extension in the 4th building, he heard, as he described, several blood-curdling screams coming from what he thought was the basement area. He said the water was too deep, and with limited lighting, he was unable to do a complete search of the area. By the next day we knew the water would have drained out of the building, so I volunteered to go check it out. I myself have a big flashlight. I entered from street level, which was actually the 3rd floor, and there was a sub-basement below it, making a total of 5 floors to descend. Where the light from my flashlight was not focused on, it was a totally blacked out environment. Couldn't see my hand right in front of my face. No sound other than my breathing and the creaking and popping of the old wooden stairwell I was climbing down. Firefighting is a pitch black job for the most part, so I wasn't freaking out about the lack of lighting. When I reached the sub-basement level, I heard a distinct male voice say, "Stop, don't go any further." It came from further down the stairs. It wasn't demonic sounding. It was just a male's deep voice, maybe a little gruff. I hesitated, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. I shined my flashlight down the steps, but the floors were roughly 20 feet apart, so I couldn't see the next landing. There was a landing at each floor's fire door and another halfway between. I was between the sub-basement landing and the next halfway landing when this happened, so technically I should have been able to see at least the outline of the next landing, but my flashlight's glow was just eaten up by the darkness. I remember I took 2 more steps down, and then my heart skipped a beat, or probably skipped because in a more forceful and louder voice it said, "Stop." It wasn't a quick stop, it was a drawn out, very matter-of-fact stop. That did it for me. I turned around and started making my way back up to the level I came in on. I'll say I was finally scared and doing a little full body shaking because I couldn't go fast because I had to visualize each and every step with my flashlight's glow. I finally made it back out into the beautiful sunshine and told my chief it was just too dark to adequately do a search. I wasn't about to tell him about the voice. He would have told me I was nuts. Later that week we had to have that building demolished, and once the debris was removed down to the basement level, we ran a cadaver dog over the area, and it hit on nothing. And then, just to say we covered all the bases, we then had a forensic team come in and go through that area, and they found nothing. I'm not sure how you would classify this type of occurrence, but I'll go to my grave knowing what I heard. I came out of the woods after hunting along a long, dark tree line beside a country lane in the backwoods of Worth County, Georgia. This place is as remote as it gets. I'm half-mile from the cabin. I got on my e-bike and started to ride. I heard a hey from the trees. I ignored it. Then 10 seconds later I hear a more panicked "Hey, come down here." I walk the bike slightly off the road and walk down the embankment. There is a tall male figure with a dim blue headlamp standing a short ways away. I say, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer, so I'm freaking out, and once more I yell, "Hello," to see if they will respond. No response, just a tall, motionless figure with a headlamp standing 10 trees away from me. Then I hear a rumbling, and it's a large SUV flying down the country road, coming over the brow of the hill with blinding headlights, doing at least 70 miles per hour. The SUV swerves off the road, throwing a huge cloud of dust into the air, and swerves back on further down. I walk closer to the trees out of shock and look back to the figure. The figure is gone. I yell hello hello 3 or 4 times. Dead silence. The figure and headlight are just gone. I'm not particularly religious, I've never had any other paranormal experience, and I have zero reason to lie. I swear on my family's lives that this incident is a true story. I know that SUV would have ended me dead. My mom used to work in a very old National Trust site. It's called Tintesfield in Bristol. She used to work in one cottage and occasionally had to go down to 2 other separate cottages that were located next to each other. The one she maintained was the most remote. It was basically up a dirt path, and then you'd find yourself in the middle of the forest, next to the cottage. It was a bit creepy, especially in the dark. The cottage had very old, dated furnishings, needed new plastering and painting, and included a creepy old shed in the back. You get the gist of it. Anyway, the first story I remember is this. We, sis, mom, dad, and I, were at the cottage. It must have been about 2100 hours. It was sometime in November, I think, so pretty dark. We were there this late, as we only had to pick up a bag of linen or something. My mom was around the back locking the door on her way out when she heard a hoarse voice bellowing a shout. My sister, dad, and I were in the car. She rushed around and told us, but it wasn't us. We had hardly said a word. Anyway, that isn't scary at all, and it doesn't answer any of your questions, but I thought I'd add it in, as the next story almost substantiates this one. The electrician was there one day. He told my mom about a time he was there, again, late at night. There's a big window that shows the kitchen and dining room that you have to walk past to get to the door. As he walked past, he saw a very pale face squashed against the window. I don't remember anymore, but I don't think he saw that ghost again. The bottom cottages are the most haunted, though. The other workers who only worked in those cottages have experienced significant paranormal activity and have seen several ghosts. There are the odd things like seeing a face in the bedroom windows or lights going on and off, but then there are actual ghosts that they had seen in person. The one I remember the most is one of the women who went upstairs and entered a room that had a chair and table in it. There was a very tall man, face as white as snow, lanky, old-looking, and wearing a suit, sitting in the chair. I don't think he turned around, but the woman went to the stairs to shout down to the other worker who was with her about the guests still staying here. Of course the reply was, "No one should be here." She looked back, and he was gone. She turned back to the stairs and was suddenly pushed down there. I think she suffered from minor injuries, but nothing serious, luckily. I'm pretty sure they've seen an old woman, voices coming from inside, a little girl, and people walking around at night. They didn't mention what the texture was like, but that suit is what stays in my mind. Creepy. I was driving home from work late one night. It was about 10:30 p.m., overcast with a little fog, sometime in late fall. My route took me off the highway and through a farming area, thick trees on the left, fields on the right. The road was really straight, and my headlights reached far ahead. I was scanning for deer, which I often saw on this road. A ways ahead of me, I saw movement in the tree line, so I started to slow down. Instead of a deer, a person slipped out of the tree line. They didn't have a flashlight or cell phone light. They sauntered onto the road, and I slowed down even more. I couldn't see any clear features, but it was clearly a person with long legs and thin arms. I could see the bend of their knees and the swing of their arms. They were still pretty far ahead. About the halfway mark across the road, they swiveled their heads to look in my direction. And, in one fluid motion, fell to all fours. They took off in a loping, bounding run into the field. I was able to see them for a couple seconds more, and it was fast. My dad's a hunter, so I asked him what he thought. He said it was probably a bear and showed me some videos. It didn't look anything like a bear. It was too thin, too lanky. I could clearly see the bends in its knees and elbows. It walked with the fluid confidence of a person. And then bounded away like a beast. It's been years, and every once in a while I think about it and watch more videos of bears walking. It still doesn't match, and I can't convince myself that was what it was. And yes, I stopped taking that route home. I spent the extra 5 minutes to go the long way. There's a thing. If I talk about it too specifically or try to name it, some deep animal fear springs up inside me, and I feel as if I'm going to be hunted unless I stop. Chills go down my spine, and I feel as if there is an unseen listener or unseen eyes watching me. It feels malevolent and it feels as if it wants to be left alone and forgotten. It feels too dangerous. I don't feel genuine fear like that very often. It was actually my friend who had the initial encounter and described it to me. A few days later I'm walking my parents' dogs around a field in the evening. The opposite end of the field led into a heavily forested area behind some backyards. As we walked around the field and got closer to the forest, there was some rustling in the brush and a flash of reflection from the eyes of some animal. Around here that usually means bear or cougar. Black bears are pussies, they'll run away from almost any loud enough noise. Cougars, you just try to avoid any sort of direct confrontation. You're generally safe in groups, and it's unusual for them to attack people. They're ambush predators, and they don't like to attack anything that could potentially harm them enough to risk a major wound that could become infected and kill them. I initially thought it was a cougar because of the cry it makes. I think the cougars cry like that to mimic injured animals to try and lure out easy prey. It's like a cat crying but far louder and with a lower timbre. But then it stood up. I froze and stared, and it stared back. So I turned and started walking away fast, and that same primal terror struck my heart. I felt hunted. I turned around to check. I was far enough away that I only saw the silhouette waving at me from the tree line. It called, far too loudly, "Hello, can you help me? Hello?" It was the voice of a woman. It didn't move from the tree line. The voice changed to that of a man. It repeated itself 2 or 3 times. Switching voices. Every fight or flight instinct in my body was going wild. My body was telling me to run away as fast as I could. I needed to get off the grass, away from the woods, and onto the safety of the pavement. The dogs were yanking to get out of the field. They were acting odd and unusually fearful. But some rational part of my mind told me that running was the absolute last thing I should do. That running might be taken as some sort of twisted invitation to chase me. This feeling, as if I couldn't do anything at all to risk making this appear to be a fun hunt. I got to the pavement. I got back into the residential neighborhood on the opposite end of the field, and the forest was now far enough away I could no longer make out the silhouette. The following day a few cats were reported missing in the neighborhood near where I had seen the thing. It was attributed to a cougar. In hindsight, the encounter felt more like a warning. I felt like being hunted, but I realized I was likely powerless in that situation. But I've never been able to figure out why anything like that would ever warn its prey to stay away. I've learned to trust my instinct when talking about it. Certain details feel safe to share. I haven't seen or heard anything since. When I was a child, my father was stationed at an army base in Maryland. And immediately adjacent to the back door of our quarters was a small family plot. When I say immediately adjacent, I mean you could step off your back porch, cross the sidewalk, and find it there. I would engage in imaginative play with some of the neighborhood children in the small family plot, and it is likely that we caused some disturbance, as my 1-year-old brother would often wake up crying at night and run to my parents' room. Normally, I would run right after him and beg them to let me stay there too, and they'd say no. If I didn't leave in time, all I could do was put my head under the covers because 2 people would suddenly be standing at the doorway, looking at me with these enormous evil smiles on their faces. I believe it was a blonde man and a blonde boy, and they were both wearing red shirts and blue pants. They'd just stare until I peed the bed. I went back about 20 years later when my youngest brother, he hadn't been born at the time of the visits, and I were driving through and saw the plot again. With my adult perspective, the graves seemed even closer to the house, but I never looked at the names on them. Which I didn't even realize until long after we left. I have always felt that something prevented me from seeing the names. There was a time when I went on a trip to the mountains in NC with a group of friends back in the summer of 2020. The Airbnb we stayed at was a beautiful 3-story cabin. We were all in the start of our 20s and, of course, decided it was a good time to drink and do whatever drugs we had. During one of those times, a friend and I were tasked to go to the basement and cut tabs for everyone, which also meant we had to be in the cold basement in the dark without being able to use any lights. The only light I was able to use was my phone on its lock screen. As I held my phone for my friend to cut the tabs, I began to look down at my feet, waiting. My eyes then slowly started adjusting to the dark, so I started to see, and hear, a bit of shifting movement behind us. I felt as if we were being watched and surrounded, but I decided to brush it off and told my friend to try and hurry. She agreed. I then looked over to the stone staircase we came down, which is when I made eye contact with something. On the steps, peering around the corner of the last few steps, was some kind of dark being, the entirety of it looking like black static. It didn't have eyes, or any real features, but it felt as if we were just staring at each other for about a solid 5 seconds. My whole body had gone still, so I couldn't do anything else but stare, and then I watched it slowly creep back behind the stairs, letting go of the wall. After that, I told the friend I was with that we needed to go now without trying to scare her. But she looked at me and told me, "I know, I see them too." We ascended the stairs afterward and agreed to refrain from discussing the incident, particularly as our friends were about to begin their experience. To this day, we still never spoke about it, and thinking about it gives me chills. It definitely changed my view on the supernatural. Story time, true. When I was in middle school, I was 11, I came home from checking my grades online at my friend's house. Upon entering my house, I noticed my family gathered in the living room, which seemed unusual, so I decided to investigate. So it happens that my dad found some old doll in our garage. Mind you, my dad went to yard/garage sales a lot and would always bring me Barbies and stuff to play with. Well, let me tell you, everybody in that room denied ever seeing the hideous thing. I would have known about it, but I had never actually seen the doll. Here's her description. This ducking doll was like 4 feet tall with hideous 80s clothing, and it had a damn mullet. We all agreed that we didn't want the doll, so we put it back in the garage for my grandma to take to some kids in Mexico. Well, when the time came for my grandma to go, we lived in Colorado, and she was on her way to Mexico. She was in New Mexico when she got into a serious car accident that severely injured her spine, and everything she owned was either lost, damaged, or packed in bags. That goddamn doll was 100% okay. They brought the damn thing back, and my grandma was on bed rest for a solid 3 months. She said she would hear footsteps at night, I would too, and when my brother and I were watching TV, our blender would turn on, and then our TV would go out. This happened more than once. Well, one day I was pissed, and I got the doll and went to throw it away at our local park. Dumb choice, I know. Outhouse wasn't rid of paranormal shit. One night I precisely went to bed at 11:15, and I woke up at around 1 a.m. feeling dizzy and sick as duck. I was sweating terribly. I felt everything turning, and something choked me so hard I lost my breath, but it let go. I sat up, and I remember yelling so loud for so long because no one could hear me. I felt the floor moving under me, and I couldn't get up. Finally, my brother heard and tried to open the door. It was locked. I never locked my doors then. It took him like 5 minutes until he could get inside, and he said my face was so white it looked like I was dead. Well, my mom was like, "WTF is going on?" And I told her. She freaked out. The next day she took me to a healer to cleanse my hand, a healer's advice, because I had touched something that someone my age shouldn't have handled. She knew there was some negative shit on that doll and forbade me to go to the park where I threw it because it could mean something terrible would happen. Well, my dumb self went to the park like half a year after, and there was no doll. I was swinging with my friend when we saw the doll over the lake, its head facing directly at us. Well, duck that. That year we lost our house and had to relocate. I started having weird bad thoughts after that. I've always wondered if that thing latched onto me and if that's why I always see a bunch of crap. I just wanted to share this with the world. Maybe it's not like Chucky, but possessed dolls are a real deal. I have a few from an old funeral home I worked at years ago. My creepiest thing was one night I got called to pick this dude up at the local hospital morgue and bring him back to the funeral home. It was late, like 11:30 to 12 o'clock. We went to the morgue, picked up the guy, who's in a body bag, and brought him back. When we got back, it was now after midnight. We brought him into the prep room, put him on the slab, took him out of the body bag, and started to set his facial features. After we got finished and I was at the sink washing my hands, the phone in the room switched to speaker and started making this beeping sound, but it was sporadic. The next day his family showed up with his funeral service clothes, and we proceeded to dress him and get him into his casket. Again, the phone did the same thing and started making these weird beeping sounds with no dial tone. 2 days later was the service at a local church. After everyone was there and seated, the minister was going over this dude's history, and then he got to his military service. Dude was a Morse code operator back in World War II in Korea. My coworker and I looked at each other because we swore that phone sounded like it was making Morse code sounds. I'll never forget that. My mom's family and my father lived in this old country home at varying points. It's how they met. My dad was moving out, and my grandmother was moving in with all her kids. The house is on top of a mountain in rural Southwest Virginia. Dad rented the house with roommates while in college and told me many stories of when he lived there before he met my mom. He heard footsteps on the floor when he was home alone. He would hear what sounded like vague or distant conversations. A couple of times, he would see an old man walking with a cane, usually out of the corner of his eye. Later, after I was born, my mom left me in the crib upstairs, where, after a time, I started wailing. Like I was in pain. The crying abruptly stopped when she entered the room and found me sound asleep. One of my parents heard an old wind-up style record player spontaneously start playing music. My mom and dad encountered an amorphous, shimmering but kind of transparent cloud in the middle of the room once. It stuck around for a few seconds and dissipated. My older brother, when he was very little, used to tell my mom about the man who lived in the root cellar. As preteens, my cousins and I played a game we called roof ball. We threw a ball on the tin roof and scrambled to catch it when it rolled off. On one throw, there was a pale face perfectly framed in the attic window. My mom, sister, and I flew in from out of state to spend Christmas with the family when I was a teenager. I stayed in the smallest bedroom upstairs and woke up to motion across the room. It looked like someone slinking into the closet. A very brief thing. Stayed on a pull-out bed in the same room as my mom and sister for the rest of the trip. The house was neat. Very old, even when my parents were young. It was purchased by a preservation society when I was a young adult, and the house was returned to its original glory. I think it is a wedding or event venue now. But to my family, it was always just an old Appalachian country house. I primarily worked in demolition, focusing on interior projects, where we would mostly remove walls and flooring for offices that were undergoing remodels. Back in 2012 we were at the IDS Tower in MN, and we had to work overnight, so other floors wouldn't be disrupted by our noise, and I was in the penthouse where we would store our tools, so one night I was loading up my tool belt and heading down to the top floor, and the elevator randomly broke when I was inside it. I was by myself, so I called my supervisor, and he called the building to handle it and get me out. It was over an hour, and the lights kept flickering, and I was bored and thankfully had my cell phone, and I was calling friends to pass time, and no one would answer. Third shift problems, lol, but the next morning my friend asked why I left a whisper voicemail. Well, for one thing, I didn't leave any voicemail. When someone doesn't answer, I just hang up. But he had a 10-second voicemail from me, all whispers and one faint voice, and it's the creepiest shit. We can't make out any words besides maybe out. And after being stuck, I felt weird the rest of the time in that building, like someone was behind a corner watching me. I hated being alone in that building. I live in a house whose original foundation is from 1887. I have lived in this house with my wife for 20 years. I have seen countless apparitions. I have seen full human entities, countless black figures, and even a fully blue electric man. I have countless stories on this subject. I don't know where to start, but I will tell you about what the ghosts are like. The first to be seen was a young boy, maybe like 5 or 6 years old, not scary. The second is a worker in his 30s or 40s. Again, he isn't very scary. I will be watching TV in the basement and looking over, and he will be watching the TV. Lol. But the third is a different story completely. This one is a big guy. I am 6 feet and used to have a long red beard and a shaved head. This guy had appeared to my wife, brother, and me multiple times. For example, my bro was living downstairs and heard me walk down the stairs, so he started talking to me. He looked over quickly and saw me. But I wasn't talking, so he looked again, and he said it was me but just disappeared. I have also seen the same thing, wife too. I have had my voice mimicked and my friend's voice mimicked. My son was about a year old. He had woken up at about 3:30 a.m. and wanted a bottle. I sat him on my knee facing my front room to drink the bottle. As he is drinking, the house gets darker. The only light that was on was the bathroom. I see a black mist start rolling out of the front room and turn into a figure of a man. My son sees this as well. He leans in to look better, abruptly smacks his bottle out of his mouth, and looks at me like, "Are you seeing this shit?" Lol. I calmly say, "Well, time to go back to bed." And go to bed. As my son grew, he needed to start sleeping in his room. Which was the room's front room. He would wake up screaming. And I mean screaming for us. So my wife and I talked to him about it. He was only about 3. With no prompting, he told my wife, "The black man doesn't like the fans in the basement." My son had no clue we grew marijuana. So I decided I would sleep in that room. I slept in that room for probably 5 years. Once or twice a week, a black figure would wake me up in my doorway. The door is open, and I sleep with it closed. I became so used to this I would simply roll over and say, "Go duck yourself," and go back to sleep. Countless friends and family have seen these things too. I have so many stories about this, but I will leave you with one of the craziest. I was in the NY grow room mixing my plant food. The lights are about to go out, but I still need to water the plants. But the atmosphere feels heavy in there, as if something is trying to keep me away. So there is a whiteboard leaning against the wall on a table. I don't touch the table, but the whiteboard comes off the wall and hits me. I simply say, "Go duck yourself." And go back to mixing. Once I start to water, I feel a hand grab my arm. I feel all 4 fingers and the thumb gripping the inside of my arm. I ignore it and water about 10 plants. Whole body tingling. My ex-wife and I were driving on a road on the way home. It was modestly late, like 12:30 a.m., from a movie. This is a road we'd driven 500 times before. Our car had those little yellow lights on the side mirrors that would flash on if someone were in your blind spot. We were on this straight road for about 3 miles, and there was no one in sight in either direction. About a mile on this road is a decent-sized golf course on the right. We passed that, and it was a normal drive. I can see our turn approaching in the distance, approximately half a mile away, when suddenly I noticed the yellow light flashing on my driver's side mirror, followed by a white light swiftly passing us. However, when I looked forward again after checking the yellow light in the mirror, I did not see anything in front of me. There was nothing in front or back. Here's where it gets rather odd. After I looked forward and saw nothing, I realized that I couldn't see the street where I was supposed to turn. It was a flashing four-way stop. I look right, and my ex is pointing out the window to her right with her mouth hanging open. She was pointing at the golf course we had seen a couple of miles back and had driven by. I drove for 2 more miles, saw my red flashing lights at my turn, and turned there. I have no idea how we suddenly got back 2 miles, but I know I had already passed the golf course and was seeing the flashing four-way stop ahead. Ugh. The creepiest. I went to college in Redlands, California. This was a middle-class farming community when founded and is thought to be one of the most haunted cities in the United States to this day. One of the locations most thought to be haunted is Anderson Hall, a former hospital and my freshman dorm. Some of the rooms still have an old hospital intercom on the wall, and students have heard crackling and voices over the years coming from long-dead speakers. I didn't hear anything. It's what I felt. I shared a bathroom with 3 other students. We had a small box shower, a 2-sink vanity, and a toilet in an 8 feet 4 inches room with a door on each end. I was taking a shower and had been under the water for maybe 30 seconds when I felt a hand on my right shoulder. There was no one there, so I figured it was just a change in water pressure and started washing faster, feeling creeped out. I bent down to pick up my shampoo and smacked into something other than the shower wall. It felt like skin, like legs. I stood and spun around, seeing nothing but falling water and shower walls. My pulse and breathing were cranked up to 11 at this point. I decided to get out and left the water running. I didn't want to reach for the handle. I opened the door and stepped out, grabbing my towel in one motion. The shower door was pulled shut behind me. I damn near had a stroke. I was terrified. I cried for hours and only showered in friends' rooms for the rest of the semester. I transferred to another dorm my sophomore year, which wasn't neutral but definitely different. I also had experiences south of campus, in nearby apartments, and everywhere I lived in Redlands over 5 years. I still consider it home because that place and I chose each other, but the only other place I have been that is that spiritually charged is in Europe. I used to run a summer camp and got assigned to a location on a closed Native American reservation. I was staying for the first week in a former nunnery of a Catholic church/former boarding school. The history between Native Americans, Catholic churches, and their boarding schools is a lot. And something to read about if you aren't familiar. Anywho, the energy there was heavy. I had made jokes a few times to a coworker about nuns. One day we were eating lunch, and I suddenly got really lightheaded/had chills/felt just generally ill. I went and lay down, complaining about how cold it was, and my coworker said it was 80 degrees inside. She came over to my bed and said it was freezing cold around me. I fell asleep for a little, thinking I maybe was getting sick. I woke up with lines and bruises on the soles of my feet and bruises on my back. Pretty sure a ghost nun whooped me. I have many other stories from that summer. I've had various paranormal experiences, including ghosts, but the following is the one that terrified me the most. It took place around 9 years ago, on a Friday evening. I had been to my friend's house on the other side of our village with my son, something we did most Fridays, as our sons were best friends too, and it was a nice way to end the week. My friend and I would enjoy a few drinks, but nothing excessive, as our children were only around 12 or 13 years old. My son and I left her house around 10 p.m. and started the 10-minute walk back to our house. It involved walking through a residential area of 1960s/70s built houses. As we approached a T-junction, there was an electricity substation in front of us, and I saw the silhouette of a man standing there in the shadows. I could make out that he was wearing a trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat. I felt it was very odd to be just standing there, and his attire was also strange. I felt a wave of pure terror flow through me. I glanced at my son and then looked back up, and he had disappeared. My eyes darted all around, but nope, there was no sign of anybody. I admonished myself for having an overactive imagination and wondered if I'd had one too many to drink. My relief, however, was short-lived when my son said, "Where did he go?" I asked him what he meant, and he replied, "That creepy man, didn't you see him?" The wave of terror was back, and I took my son's hand, and we started to run. We were only about 5 minutes from home and had reached a spot where there were open fields on 2 sides. My son looked round, something I dared not do, and announced that he was now behind us. I almost wet myself with fear. We carried on running, and I did not look back, even when I got home and shut the front door. My son saw him twice more, once about 15 minutes later when he was getting a drink. He looked out the kitchen window and said he saw him standing by the hedge at the bottom of the drive, and the other time was on the following Monday. We had gone on holiday 300 miles away, and my son thought he saw him from our hotel window in the service area out the back of the hotel. It was the pure terror that resonated from him that scared the life out of me. I can't even explain the fear. It was a couple of years before I even tried looking up what I had seen, as I was so frightened it would somehow manifest him again. Of course, once I did, I discovered the Hat Man was a fairly well-known phenomenon. I still haven't read much about him, though, as even typing this out so many years later makes me feel uneasy. I was sitting in my buddy's car waiting for a friend on a dark, barely lit street. I saw someone approaching through the side mirror. His legs seemed backwards and his head was contorted in a strange way, like it was hanging down to his chest. I spun around to look through the back window, and he sprinted away, unimaginably fast, like he was put in fast forward, and he vanished around a corner. "What the F?" my friend blurted out and threw the car into reverse. "The hell was that? Did you see that?" He was a dude who wasn't afraid of anything. He ended up joining Airborne and eventually Spec OCS during the War on Terror, so he drove down the street where the thing vanished. We saw nothing, despite the dead end. The driver only saw the running part. I saw him approach and run after, but in the middle I looked away to hide the beers we were underage drinking. I thought initially it was just a deformed person walking by. Only our third friend, in the back seat, watched the whole thing unfold in its entirety. The time I looked away? Just so happened to be when he walked beneath the only nearby street light, roughly 20 feet away. We asked our friend what he saw. He simply curled up against the door and pulled his knees to his chest. "Nothing," he yelled out. We asked again. I said nothing. He refused to talk about that night ever again. My husband is a farmer. One night he asked me to pick him up after working ground, and it was pretty late, around 10 o'clock. So I loaded our 2 girls up, then 4 and 2, and headed to the field. We get to the field, and C is finishing his last round, so we had to wait for a minute. I rolled the windows down in the van and shut the engine off. After a few minutes my 2-year-old says, "Mommy, who dat man outside?" I said, "I don't see a man." "Is your Ken doll on the floor?" My 4-year-old then piped up, "He's right outside your door and staring at you. He's scary. He has blood on his face." That's when I turned the key, rolled the windows up, locked the doors, and called my husband and told him to hurry the hell up because the girls are terrified, and there's apparently a scary man outside my door that I can't see, but both girls are describing him and what he's doing. Thankfully, C had finished and was heading up to the van at that moment, so we left. My girls are now 14 and 11, and they both still remember that man and refuse to go to that particular field. Our oldest is old enough to help on the farm but flat out refuses to go to that particular field. Really creepy and gave everyone goosebumps. So last night we were sitting around my brother's kitchen table, and we had the back door open. I guess I should tell you we live in NY State, but my brother has our 82-year-old father living with him, who was in Florida for the past 5 years. So he had a heater in his room, and their heat was on, so the kitchen was hotter than I don't know what, so we opened the back door to cool ourselves off. So we were all sitting there talking and playing cards. My sister-in-law was holding my nephew, and I was making faces at him. It was my turn to play, so I looked forward, and when I was done, I turned to play with my nephew again and saw someone, who kind of looked like my brother who had passed, just really short, peeking around the corner of the door into the kitchen at us. When the figure looked at me and noticed that I was watching, it quickly retreated behind the door. I didn't get a bad vibe from it, it didn't feel malevolent in any way, but you can never be too sure. So it was my turn again and again. When I was done, I turned around to play with the baby, and they were peeking again, almost like they were ready to come in, but again, when they saw me peeking, they ducked back around the corner. This happened one more time, but this time they did not duck back around the corner. It was standing there with its arms outstretched to my sister-in-law while looking at me. I got freaked out and had a weird look on my face. My sister-in-law said, "What's wrong?" I very calmly told her, "Reach over and close that door, please." So she swung it closed, and then we heard it. She had some food storage bowls sitting on a shelf in the back hall, and they all fell as if something were walking past them in the attic and bumped into the shelf. So she again asked me, "Why did you want the door shut?" I explained to her what I had seen. She confirmed that it was a little chilly just before she shut the door. My brother and she both said, "What in the hell? You just gave us goosebumps." At times, I can see or feel things for some reason, and I have been able to do so for a while, even though lately it seems to happen less frequently. I am just not sure if they were trying to get at the baby or her. Or maybe it was me they wanted. I was sitting next to her. Paranormal experience, true story. Before I start, you should know that I lived in an area with very few people at the time of this story, in the rural areas of Australia. And yes, this did happen to me. Many years back I had to grab something from the car. It was pitch black outside, and there was no wind, so I could pick up on any sound. I felt uneasy for an unknown reason, like something bad would happen. I grab what I need and head in, but before I get to the door I hear a bell ringing. I turn around to see if I can find where the sound is coming from and notice a red light speeding down the road. This scared the shit out of me, it was so random. I start rushing to the door, but I am curious to see what it actually is. Eventually the red light starts heading in the opposite direction, and the bell sound also gets quieter. My gate was shut, so I knew that whatever it was couldn't get to me. At least that's what I thought. I'm just about to head inside when the ringing starts getting a lot louder. I turn around, and sure enough, it is approaching me with extreme speed. I rush inside and peek out through the closest window and see the red light 10 or so meters away from the window. I don't know what it was. I thought for hours on end about the possibilities, but considering the area I live in, I was stuck on what it could have been. Whatever it was inside my property the entire time while I was getting something out of my car. If I were even a few seconds slower, it would have reached me, and who knows where I would be today if that were the case. I woke up the next day confused and kind of forgot about it, but the next night I felt paranoid and just looked outside for a good 45 minutes, and sure enough, I saw this red light again. This time it was along another side street, thankfully not inside my property. I knew calling the police would do nothing as there was nothing they could do, so I just waited to see if I could get a glimpse of what this thing was. I waited another 5 minutes, watching it from the safety of my home, but it eventually disappeared down the road. To this day I am still paranoid of this experience, and every time I see a small red light, I am reminded of this day. I'm hoping one of you listening to this story can give me an explanation. When I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. Mother and son are drowning in the creek nearby. State police shot and ended drug dealers at a nearby hunting cabin, and of course, cheap labor died while constructing train tunnels. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat on the creek bank spotlighting fish. We heard and saw the disturbance made by invisible feet/legs sloshing towards us through water when we would turn our spotlight off, and it would stop when illuminated, but we could see the ripples in the water almost perfectly symmetrical and rhythmically headed towards where we were sitting on the creek bank. This scared us pretty bad, but we kept it quiet after a quick rationalization and joined the others gathered at the fire. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing sounds reach the spot where we were sitting on the bank, and then they stopped. Everyone else thought they were hearing fish we had riled up, but the behavior was wrong. It sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we all saw the tall grass disturbed as something ran around the foliaged perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. We then began to hear what sounded like someone gently speaking into the left ear of each person, saying, "We shouldn't be there and we needed to leave," before finally addressing us directly and saying more forcefully, "You need to leave." As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all four of us saw a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us and hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet. The legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It was darker than the dark night behind it. The girl screamed, and it zipped like a flashback toward the train tunnels people had died in. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with, who I didn't know knew this area, told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place he didn't check traps alone at night. He mentioned that it seemed as though the animals left that area at night. No less than a month later, my uncle, who owns the property, was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point, the dog was on a rock face up above him and knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how my uncle managed to return to his ATV, turn it around, and drive himself out of that location. It wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story made the rounds on the local Facebook groups that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but he is a salt of the earth, hunting, farming, working man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. Honest, funny, just an incredibly stand-up guy. He is easygoing but also no nonsense. In his text to my mother, he said, "I've never told anybody this story before, and I probably won't again. The man in the hat the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on my ATV and get me turned around." Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the shadow man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us we needed to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous. Creepy kid encounter. I've been reading a lot of stories here lately, and they honestly gave me the courage to finally share some of the creepy stuff that's happened to me. Before I get into this specific incident, a bit of background: I grew up in a house that was straight up haunted. I went through a ton of weird, unsettling experiences as a kid, but I'll save those for another day. So I'm a 31M from Iraq. A couple of months ago, I was hanging out at my best friend's place just chilling and playing video games. He had just come back from working abroad and was staying at his parents' house, so I went over to catch up. We've been best friends for over 20 years. His parents weren't home at the time, so it was just the two of us in his room, gaming and joking around like always. After a while we heard the front door open. His parents had come home. Nothing out of the ordinary, but then his mom opened the door to the room, looked inside, and immediately shut it again. From behind the door, she said in a weirdly serious tone, "Guys, can you come out here for a second?" We paused the game and stepped out, kind of confused. We asked what was going on, and she said, "Who is that kid in the room with you? Who brought him in? And why is he just standing there staring like that? Is he okay?" Then she added, "Why are you acting like there's nothing wrong when there's literally a kid in your room?" We were frozen like, "What kid?" We told her there was no one else in the room, just us. We opened the door and showed her no one was there. Her face went pale. She kept insisting she saw a child standing right behind us staring at the screen. Then she said when she opened the door, the kid turned and made direct eye contact with her, and it freaked her out so badly she shut the door immediately, and then she started crying. We tried to calm her down and told her maybe it was a weird shadow or something from the game, but she swore on everything that she saw him clear as day, like no doubt in her mind. His mom isn't someone who makes up stuff or talks about the paranormal. She's a very grounded, wise, and kind person. Seeing her react like that honestly scared the shit out of me. My paranormal experiences. Has anyone else ever had similar experiences? Hi, I want to say I'm more sensitive to people and energies, more of an empath, and I want to tell some stories that have triggered my third eye multiple times. 1. Native Americans and the tribe Navajo. I live in a small town in Washington that is near Canada, and I had dreams about being Native American and most likely being in the Navajo tribe. I want to specify I am a white person. I do not have any Native American blood, but these dreams are truly traumatic and terrifying. This was when I was a boy, and I saw some white men on horses asking one of the elders for something. The elders not only spoke in their own native tongue but also spoke a little bit of English. It wasn't good, but I couldn't understand the Englishman and only understood my elder in this dream. Blue feathers were represented. We had at least 2 horses, and others were on foot. This Englishman described that they were asking for land. I remember one of the native men asking us to go home in a whisper and telling us to go. I kept asking why we couldn't leave without our elder. The situation was escalating. From what I can remember, I think these Englishmen were asking for land or for money. They were essentially robbing the people in this dream. It was a sunny day, trees surrounded us. One of the Englishmen had ended the elder using a large rifle, similar to those from the 1800s. I wouldn't be surprised if Navajo people were in Washington state first. I was very saddened by the death. It had destroyed me and traumatized me. This happened a couple years ago, I want to say about 2022 or 2023. Note, the tribe wasn't historically located in Washington but is in Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. 2. Working men in the house. I live with 3 other people in the house: my mom, my dad, and my brother. We have 4 cats and 1 dog, but if there is one sound that we all consistently hear, it is the sound of footsteps. One night I was on the phone with my partner, my brother was playing a game, and my parents were in bed. The cats were most likely asleep, and the dog was with my parents. There were heavy footsteps, like working boots heavy. My dad and I assumed that there are men who probably used to work here in this house in the garage. We are also by the train tracks. They wake up at 4 a.m. and come back home at 10 p.m. If anything, they're more likely working right now as I am writing this. Luckily these men are pretty peaceful and don't disturb the house. They know we live here. They also used to live here. Returning to the story, I heard heavy footsteps and told my partner, "Hold on, I'm hearing someone coming up the stairs." I listened closely. It was about 11 p.m., and the train had recently derailed as well. I asked, "Hey, who's coming up the stairs?" And the footsteps stopped. I texted my dad, told him what I heard, and he asked me some questions, and I told him that these footsteps sound like working boots. I haven't heard footsteps since then. This incident happened about last month. 3. The little girl in my room. Between the ages of 9 and 12, I attempted to open my third eye, but forcing it is never a good idea. Please be safe when doing so. Since I was 8 or 9 years old, there has always been this girl with long brown or black hair who wore a white dress and wept with her hands covering her face. I always thought or wondered who she was, but she grieved every night. Until I became a teenager, she had disappeared. I am uncertain of her whereabouts or origins, but I have always presumed she was my shadow. What are your thoughts on it? I'd like to hear your stories, thoughts, and opinions on these. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time. A few interesting family stories. When my great-grandmother was a child, she lived way out in the country. The house was in an open field with no trees or hills very close by. Every so often, the family would hear rocks pelt off of their tin roof during the night. It wasn't just a few rocks here and there, it was like a hailstorm of rocks. When they went outside the next morning, there would be rocks all around their house, but there was nowhere they could have come from. There was a witch who lived in the small mountain community in the Appalachian Mountains where my mother's people were from. Everyone was deeply Christian, but they tolerated the old witch partly because they were scared of her but also because she was apparently a very good healer and made love potions, etc. The weird thing, and this odd detail freaks me out to this day, was that whenever anyone in the community wanted to slaughter a hog, someone had to volunteer to take the old witch into town a few miles away because as long as she was in the community, hogs wouldn't bleed. You could shoot them or cut their throats, and literally nothing would happen. Finally, my wife is from Vietnam and told me that one of her cousins was returning from Saigon to their village and stopped to talk to a friend he saw on the side of the road as he approached home. The friend asked if the cousin wanted to get ice cream. He said, "Sure," and the friend hopped on the back of the moped, and they took off for the ice cream shop. When they reached the ice cream shop, the cousin was freaked out to discover that the friend was no longer on the back of the moped. When he went home and told his mom, she informed him that the friend had been ended in a moped accident at the very spot the cousin picked him up. The thing that I find interesting about this story is that we have all heard it before. I was surprised to learn that this exact same story is told and believed on the other side of the world in a totally different culture. A spooky thing happened on a hunting trip. The story I am about to tell is not one I personally experienced but one told to me by my father, who experienced it firsthand many years ago. He went on a coon hunting trip one autumn night with his uncle and a family friend of theirs. For those who don't know what coon hunting is, it is hunting raccoons, usually at night, using a scent hound bred for that type of thing. It was common in the southern United States, and that's where this took place, in a remote, rural area in the southeastern US in the late 1970s/early 1980s. It should be noted that a good, trained coonhound never leaves a raccoon it tracks and corners up a tree. My uncle had 2 fully trained, reliable coonhounds with an excellent hunting record. On this particular night, the 3 men each had a light source. One had a carbide lamp, another had a brand new flashlight with brand new batteries, and another had a lantern. The location they chose to hunt in was an area my uncle had been many times. It was truly a remote area, far removed from civilization, and was one of the most beautiful wilderness areas one had ever seen. It was located near a national park. That night they drove a little farther out than they usually did and let the dogs out. It didn't take long for the dogs to track down a coon. The men followed the dogs and had to walk quite a bit off the regular path this time. They ended up well outside the usual area. It was an area my uncle was not familiar with. They found the dogs at a very large tree situated on a cliff. There were no other trees around it, and they could hear the sound of water flowing in a creek beneath the cliff. The strange thing about the tree was this stone that was sitting beneath it. My dad said the stone resembled a gravestone, the way it was positioned upright, just below the tree, and the way it looked. It looked almost as if it had been placed there. As soon as the hunting party reached the tree where the dogs were, the dogs suddenly went silent and walked away from the area, in the direction from which the group had just come. My uncle noted that the dogs' behavior was uncharacteristic of them because they had never just walked off like that when there was a coon in a tree. My dad thought it was odd as well. He said he had never seen them act that way. It was as if something had spooked them. Baffled by the dogs' behavior, still, they decided to look to see if there was a coon there. My dad leaned against the stone and shone his light up into the tree. There was no coon to be found, which again was highly unusual. If there wasn't a coon, what were they chasing? As soon as my dad leaned against the tree and shone the light into it, their friend's carbide lamp suddenly went out. My dad said that as soon as their friend uttered the words "my light went out," the other two lights simultaneously went out as well. Alone in the woods, and completely in the dark, a feeling of uneasiness settled over the men. My uncle, who was a logical-minded man, calmly stated, "There's probably a reasonable explanation for what has just happened. We need to all remain calm. Let's just step away from here and make our way back to the Jeep." So they headed back the way they came. About a half mile to a mile on their way back, their lights all came back on, as if nothing had happened. They found the dogs a little farther down the way, nearer to the Jeep. My dad never went back there to hunt again. What is interesting to note is this particular area is near a well-known area of the park where lots of people, through the years, drowned in the river there. It is purported to be a haunted spot. There have been ghost sightings and all kinds of strange occurrences in that area. It's possible they wandered into the park, near that very spot where some unfortunate soul drowned. A true story about ghosts in my childhood, one I'll never forget. The Rotten Man. My first trip to Florida with my grandpa was to visit family that lived there. It was after my grandma died. He picked me up from school and said we were going on a trip. I was excited to see something different after being in that house. At the time, I was really getting into researching the occult as well, to gain an understanding of my abilities and what we were experiencing on Center Street. The time away wasn't a reprieve from my experiences. The field by my uncle's house that they hunt in for rabbits was known for wandering spirits. My cousins and I decided to stay outside one night and wait for them to wander through the foggy field. After hours of waiting, I saw a shadow wander through the field. I instantly was reminded of the shadow people on Center Street. All my cousins but one ran. He and I were both more curious than afraid. So I thought, he spoke up, "I don't see anything out there." We both laughed as we walked back to the house. He was a skeptic when it came to the paranormal, understandably. After the trip, they decided to follow us back to Ohio for a few days. Coming back to that house left me feeling sick to my stomach. That night we decided to play in the yard. I really didn't want to, but still being young, I was convinced. We walked into the very backyard, which resembles a junkyard, with my grandpa's habit of collecting it. We were discussing my experiences in the yard. The same cousin, unafraid, was sure I was making it all up. The rain began to fall, and I instantly got goosebumps, like I have many times when a spirit is around. This time it was like every fiber of my being wanted to run. "Do you feel that?" The words came out of my mouth as lighting fell close by. It made what I was feeling visible, in my opinion, to both me and my cousin. It was a man wearing a jumpsuit, at least 7 or 8 feet tall. His eye sockets were empty, and his skin was like gray leather stretched across his face. Those few moments were enough to make us run for the house. I didn't go back there again until weeks later to retrieve the shoe that came off my foot. This was the only time I saw this entity so detailed. I am sure it was the energy from the storm that allowed it to manifest so clearly. I say it because I don't think this entity was ever human. It is one of many dark spirits that roam the property, appearing as contorted humans to cause fear, their favorite food source. Shadow encounter. I often wonder why children seem to possess the ability to see ghosts. I, too, had a ghostly encounter when I was younger. Fortunately, that sensitivity has since faded. I must have been about 10 years old when my family and I went to do a major cleanup at my mom's house. It was due to be rented out soon, and it had been vacant for quite some time. It's a pretty old house, probably around 10 years. Before we even began, my aunt, who was also there to help, started throwing handfuls of rock salt all over the house. My mom sternly told me to stay quiet, but my curious mouth itched. I couldn't help but ask loudly, "What is Auntie throwing?" My mom just glared at me, maintaining her silence, and that was enough to shut me up. Our family is of Chinese descent, and we are a pretty superstitious bunch. My aunt continued her ritual, scattering salt from the first floor, in the living room, in the kitchen, and in the storeroom, then moving upstairs to each of the bedrooms, even the bathrooms and the balcony. And guess who was designated to clean up all that salt? I was the only one available to do the labor. So, broom in hand, I started sweeping up the salt. I worked my way up from the first floor, and as I reached the middle of the stairs connecting to the second floor, I felt something watching me. When I turned, I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure stood by at the doorway of the middle bedroom. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, the master on the left, another on the right, and the one I saw was the middle one. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to walk up to the second floor. I'm still puzzled as to why I decided to go up. Why did I walk straight into that bedroom? Perhaps it was bravery, but more likely, it was just stupidity. Tot. When I stepped into the room, I found nothing. Just a space filled with stagnant air, thick with enough dust to make anyone sneeze. The windows were tightly shut, offering no ventilation whatsoever. There was only a double-decker bed, and dust particles danced lazily in the air, illuminated by the afternoon sun streaming through the window. Then, I decided to leave. But the moment I turned around, a loud bang hammered through my ears. Shocked, I saw the door shut itself with force. Mind you, there was no wind, nobody else lived in this house, and I was completely alone on that floor. At that moment, my heart pounded so heavily it felt like it would burst from my chest. Most people might instinctively open the door and run, but I wasn't in the right state of mind to even think. I just froze, standing like a statue for a good few minutes. Then, slowly, I reached out to open the door. But I couldn't open the damn door. Trapped, I started to panic, shaking the knob crazily. This might sound funny in hindsight, but the reason I couldn't open it was probably because I was pushing it in the wrong direction. I was supposed to pull the freaking door. But that doesn't explain why the heavy, old wooden door slammed shut on its own in the absence of any wind. Once I finally managed to open it, I leapt down the stairs in what felt like 3 hops, rushing straight to my mom. Luckily, I didn't pee myself or anything, but I was so scared. I never told my family, and those who rented the house after the incident were fine. To this day, I still don't know what I saw there. Maybe it was real, or perhaps it was just a child's overactive imagination. Luckily, as I grew older, I rarely ever encountered any strange entities. My sisters and I used to babysit for the most quintessentially haunted house. I was the youngest, so the kid was a bit older by the time I started, but there were a lot of creepy occurrences over the years. I think the worst happened to my oldest sister. Anyway, to set the scene, the house was a mile down a private dirt road, past a swamp and spooky forest. It was a 3-story mansion from the 1800s on a hill with an abandoned tennis court and overgrown orchard in the backyard. The house never had any cell reception, and the landline phones were often dead because the parents frequently forgot to charge them. The house had an old hand-pulled elevator and an old dumbwaiter. Additionally, they employed a haggard landscaper who stored his equipment in a shack at the back of the property, and he was permitted to hunt and prepare his kills on the land. Therefore, occasionally, as you drove up their private driveway, you would encounter a creepy-looking guy giving you a stare down while butchering his strung-up deer, which contributed to the overall atmosphere. The kid was a little odd. When my oldest sister started babysitting for him, he was a baby. She used to hear footsteps on the baby monitor but told herself that was her imagination. One day she was making the kid lunch in the basement kitchen when she heard people talking/laughing upstairs. The parents weren't meant to be home for a while, so she thought maybe they forgot to mention a cleaner/maid service was coming by that day and had the key. She asked the kid, around 3/4 by now, if his parents had housekeepers, and he replied, "No, we hear voices sometimes, but mommy and daddy say not to talk about that." Another time, while she was cooking, she swore she saw a woman walk through the room out of the corner of her eye. When she looked up, she only caught a glimpse of the woman entering the TV room/den. Then the TV turned on by itself. She was freaking out inside but tried to stay calm as she asked the kid to go turn off the TV. He started crying and asked not to go in there alone. She ended up agreeing to go in with him to turn it off, and she made him enter first because she was freaked out, lol. Another time she was cat-sitting, watering their plants while the family was out of town. She brought her guy friend along because she would rather not be in the house alone. As they did their rounds of the house, the master bedroom door slammed shut, and the knob jiggled as though someone were behind it. Like, not just wind. She and her friend just looked at each other for a beat and bolted out of there. By the time my middle sister started, he was 6-ish, he would regularly refer to things around the house and say they belonged to the dead people. He would even point to his parents' car and say, "That's the dead people's car." One time he went into a trance staring at some antique painting and started rolling around on the ground repeating some guy's name. It took her yelling his name before he finally snapped out of it, and she seemed confused about why she was yelling. The first time I ever babysat for him, he was 8 or so. I was sitting in a doorway to the hallway as he played with toys on the ground when he looked over my shoulder and seemed confused before forcing out a laugh and saying, "That was weird." I asked him, "What was weird?" And he just looked ashamed and then went back to playing as he mumbled, "Nothing. I just saw someone, but I didn't want to scare you, so I started laughing instead." My gut dropped then. Anyway, a lot of other creepy things over the years, plus his frequent night terrors, where he'd wake up screaming about a man in the room, sleep sprinting downstairs, usually only when he slept in a particular room. The creepiest part was when he had sleepovers. The parents would usually have them sleep in this particular room, and multiple children over the years would also experience night terrors, wake up with blood-curdling screams about a man in the room. Another girl who babysat for the family refused to be in the house once the kid was asleep because she hated the feeling of being in it so much. She informed the child that she would be on the porch if he needed her and then proceeded to read her book while waiting for the parents. Even if it was 2 a.m. and freezing, she preferred to be outside rather than in the unsettling house. I think what was possibly the creepiest aspect was that the parents seemed to enjoy the activity. Like the day the kid went into a trance, they just laughed it off and said they'd mention it to his therapist. My sister, meanwhile, was creeped out but also genuinely concerned, thinking of other possibilities that would warrant a parent's concern, like the kid might have been having a seizure, but they were a rather eccentric couple who hosted a huge Halloween party each year and loved the spooky decor. They also were very involved with the town's New Age Wellness Center, whose board is run by the current prominent figures of Thelema. I was 98% sure they were somewhat involved in swinging, but specifically as magic swingers. The house was historic, and Aleister Crowley was known to hang out there and perform rituals with the neighbors. I believe they were aware that the house was extremely haunted and chose to embrace it, even if the presence disturbed their child. In the late 2000s, my friends and I would always go meet in the parking lot of this church in our neighborhood to skateboard or just hang out and get into mischief together. One night, my friend and I met up there after he had just come from the movie theater. He was explaining the movie to me. I forget what movie he was telling me about, and he said, and then the lights went off. Right at that moment, the lights illuminating the parking lot of the church shut off, which never happened. We both felt a weird vibe, so we instantly got on our boards and booked it to the front of the church and towards the main road. To go back to our homes, we lived across the street from each other. We were hauling. Once we reached the front of the church and the main road, the street lights began to turn off. As soon as we would go under a light, it would turn off. It happened all the way until we got to our street. It felt like a scene from a movie, occurring precisely when my buddy said, and then the lights went off. We've talked about it multiple times after, and it was my longest shared experience of something not normal. What was that? I experienced this encounter when I was younger, and I still think about it, wondering what I saw on that particular day. When the event happened, I was in middle or elementary school. I was visiting a friend at his home, which resembled a mansion, at least in comparison to my own. It had 2 floors, a pool, and even a private forest. We were just having fun, and everything was normal. We spent the whole afternoon playing. But then the night came. We were alone at the house, and I don't really remember why, but we were playing a piano he had on the first floor. All the lights were off except the one right above us. From the piano, you could see the living room, the dimming table, and a bit of the kitchen. The ceiling was really high, and the house had an L shape, so in front of us there was a wall and a corner that prevented us from seeing the kitchen. I was playing the piano, and I really had to concentrate on the keys. This is when it all started. My friend who was sitting right beside me started tapping my shoulder, telling me to look at the corner, but as I said, I had to concentrate on the keys, so I ignored him a handful of times. He sounded worried, but I really wanted to play the song correctly. When I finished playing the song, I looked up and saw it peeking high up in the corner. You could just see its head and hands. It didn't have a face, it was all black, except for a white ring it had where its face was supposed to be. But the scariest thing was its fingers. They were extremely long, and I could see how it moved them as it hid right when I saw it. My friend ran upstairs, and I went into the kitchen to find out what it was, but I didn't find anything. What could that thing have been? And another question I have and still think about, why did it hide from me? My friend saw it for a considerable amount of time. What did I see? A couple of weeks ago, I went for a walk with my girlfriend at night, and as we passed a house with no curtains, I stopped because I saw what I thought was a statue hunched over next to the window inside. I told my GF how creepy it was to have that. So we continued walking, and she mentioned that she had also seen it but refrained from saying anything due to its frightening appearance. But I told her I'm going to go back and take a picture of it because I thought it was super creepy. I walked a few steps back to the sidewalk in front of the house, stared at it for 10 to 15 seconds, and noticed that what I perceived as its face was smooth, featureless, and shaped like a head. It resembled a mannequin with a featureless face. As I pulled out my phone to take a picture of it, it moved to the left and went down the hallway, and I could sort of see it by this room after that. I got scared and told my girlfriend that it was moving, so she came towards me, but by the time she arrived, it had disappeared from the window. The way it moved was as if it were gliding. Anyways, we took off running and went home. When I get home, I tell my mother and sister about the encounter, but they seem indifferent and suggest that I might not be sure about what I saw or that I didn't get a clear look. But I tried telling them I stared at this thing when I first saw it. I didn't glance past it or see it from the corner of my eye. I stared at it. A couple of days ago, my mother and sister went to get pizza at a place around the corner from that house, and they sent me a video showing the creature, which appears to be sitting and looking out the window. And they come back freaked out and scared. My mother has expressed her reluctance to discuss what she witnessed, while my sister has advised me to begin praying. I wasn't in the car with them, so I didn't get to see it that night apart from the video they took. I went for a walk again and walked past the house, and I saw it sitting down facing a wall this time. I'm not sure what it is that I'm seeing. I was dead set on it being a creepy tall statue, but I'm not sure what to think since I saw it move, and even my girlfriend saw that it wasn't where it was moments before that. And now I've seen it in different positions. I know some people will say maybe it's a person, but I saw its face and looked at it for probably a total of 20 seconds. I know what I saw, and it wasn't a person. The basement of my in-laws' house has some activity, though it has been, for the most part, quiet lately. Usually, we only get those blacker than black shadow/silhouette figures down there. I'm pretty alert to the presence of anything out of the ordinary and would know when something else was in the room. My wife, on the other hand, experiences the unfortunate phenomenon of sleep paralysis when there is something else present. In this state, she is stuck between dreaming and being awake, which alerts me further because she starts murmuring, talking, or yelling loudly in her sleep. My wife explains that during her dreams, she envisions herself in bed while something or someone, appearing angry or malevolent, approaches her. She is unable to move and can only lie there, watching as it gets closer and closer. Sometimes it yells at her, other times, it lifts her out of bed, though I can assure you she doesn't levitate, so it must be part of the dream state. But she can only see, hear, feel, and yell at it. She's usually paralyzed from the neck down. I was slightly receptive to this when she first told me, only because I had felt something strongly in parts of this house, the basement, where there's a finished living room/spare bedroom, in particular. There were numerous occasions/nights where we'd be down there, and I'd get a strong sense of something in the room. A large, red, digital LED clock was visible from almost every corner of the room. I'd get that slight overwhelming, spine-tingling feeling that something was there, peek my eyes open slowly, and see that the clock was blocked by a black form. That damn clock didn't help. A red light emanating around a black figure was extra ducking creepy. I finally trashed that thing. On one occasion, I had the same feeling, peeked my eyes open, and could see it moving slowly toward our bed. My wife started murmuring really badly. I slowly grabbed onto and squeezed her hand, and she plainly said, "It's in here. At the edge of the bed." I replied, "I know." At that moment, we felt a weight on the bed, and I felt this icy grip go up my right leg. I jumped up fast and stared right at this shadow. My wife sat up, and I watched it basically zoom/float to the doorway. My wife reported seeing a flash of light or an orb fly towards the door. Now, there were a couple of occasions where I had gotten really sick and didn't get out of bed for a few days. One time I think it was severe tonsillitis. I couldn't eat or drink without severe pain. My throat was swollen up to the point where sipping ice water felt like swallowing a razor blade. My dumb self refuses to go to the doctor. One night, I was so out of it, but I remember it clear as day. I had a couple of conversations with some of the beings down there, an old Italian man, whom I somehow spoke fluent Italian with, and a little girl. Both were, mainly, only visible in black and white/grayscale, like old TV shows. The old man just seemed confused/lost. I don't know what the hell I was even saying, but I just got a sense of confusion. The little girl, on the other hand, was very talkative and told me how she loved bubblegum and the color pink, and even though her entire form was black and white, she had a bright pink bow, and I could see the gum she was chewing was pink. Damnedest thing. My wife had happened to pop downstairs to check on me. During the conversation with the old man, she said that she thought she heard me talking or moving around and wanted to know how I was feeling. I remember her coming downstairs and asking, "Who are you talking to?" I told her, "I dunno, there's this old Italian guy in the corner rambling on about something," and then I started talking to him in Italian. I swear I never saw her move so fast up those basement stairs in my life. I remember when I started feeling better, I went upstairs and told her about the whole night. She told me she has seen both the old man and the little girl in her dream states. The old man usually gets in her face and screams Italian-sounding gibberish at her. The little girl usually just hangs around chewing something and has a pink bow. She believes it's a child she miscarried before we met. I'm convinced the shadow figure is the old man in a less visible form. The old owner visited the house. Shortly after college I decided to rent a room from my brother. He owned a second house about 40 minutes away in a more rural part of town, where he also worked, so I had the house to myself most of the time. I had been living there for a few months, and nothing unusual had occurred. Then a few strange occurrences started. One day I was in the shower and I heard footsteps, which I thought nothing of due to my brother being in and out of the house all the time. But when I got out of the shower and went to the living room, he wasn't home. I figured I just missed him. I went on about my business getting ready for work. When I walked down the hall coming out of the bedroom I was renting, the door closed hard behind me. I looked back, and my bedroom door had closed. For context, the hall has 2 bedrooms at the end. One bedroom is positioned diagonally in the corner of the hall, leading into the larger master bedroom, which I was renting, while the other bedroom opens directly into the hallway. The door that closed behind me was mine. I was then starting to be a little more alert, but still just chalked it up to a draft in the house or something. That same night I got back home, and the doorbell rang. I went to answer the door, and there was no one there. I glanced around outside for a moment to determine if I was experiencing a ding-dong ditch prank, but there was no indication of anyone nearby. I went back into the house and texted my brother asking if he had been by today, and he said no. Told him I thought I heard the doorbell ring, and he told me it was not hooked up. I went into the dining room, and sure enough, the components of the doorbell were sitting there on the table. On full alert now. The next couple of days go by without anything terribly eventful happening. Several times I thought I heard footsteps and even a faint voice, but it was always while I was in the shower. After a few days had passed, I was getting ready to leave for work again. I completely misplaced my cell phone. Looked everywhere for it but couldn't find it. Thankfully, this was several years ago when most people still had landline phones, so I used my brother's house phone to call my phone. I heard it ringing in the sitting room by the front door, so I set the receiver down on the table and started to walk that way. I followed the ring walking down the hall, through the dining room, and finally around the corner in the sitting room by the front door. When I walked into the sitting room, the phone stopped ringing abruptly. I saw it sitting on the end table, so I picked it up and went back to the other room to hang up the phone. When I walked into the room, the phone was on the receiver. I retraced my steps, wondering if I had accidentally hung up the phone after making a call, but I followed the ring across 3 rooms of the house, so there was no possible way I could have done that. That night my brother was at the house, and I asked if he'd ever heard anything weird in the house, and he said no. I asked him if he knew anything about the previous owner of the house and whether she was still alive, and he told me that just last week, her family had stopped by to inform him of her death and to request permission to spread her ashes on the waterfront in the backyard, as she had lived there for 30 years and wanted to be laid to rest there. I must have turned white or something because his reaction was to look at me and say, "Why? You're freaking me out." I heard footsteps while in the shower for another week or so after that, and then they stopped. I've never believed in that kind of stuff, but this was truly bizarre. A translucent being next to the bed, studying me. The setting is my dad's old house that is debatably haunted. It's located in a small, one-stoplight town in rural Delaware. It was built in the early 1900s and surely has a long history I'm not totally versed on. My dad moved here to live and run his business after splitting with my mom when I was about 9. Without sounding too stereotypical, this house just had a weird vibe to it. So much so that my dad's girlfriend, who often stayed with him, would get a hotel room when he was out of town on work travel. She claimed she would hear typical haunted noises like footsteps and doors closing. Aside from paranormal activity, it was factually documented that there were 2 degenerate kids who lived with their parents there in the past who were known for being troublemakers and often getting arrested. Before I describe the main event of this story, it's worth noting my dad at this time was a full-blown alcoholic trying to recover. He would tell of agonizing nights trying to quit drinking cold turkey, where he would wake up in a delirious sweat hearing what seemed to be a full-blown party happening in the main room downstairs with clinking glasses and shouting voices, but when he would open his door, it would all cease. He would also be visited by living and non-living friends of his who all aimed to help him get better. He would become fully sober and live for another 20+ years alcohol-free. One night I was staying over at his house. I'm about 9 and sleeping in his bed. He just moved in, and I didn't have a room yet. Nothing out of the ordinary this night. I still get goosebumps at this point. We're dead asleep, probably about 2 a.m., and I wake up for no apparent reason and look across the bed on my dad's side to see a small translucent being sitting/standing bedside staring at me. I fear sounding off the rails here, but it looked like a small alien-like being, except it was see-through and sort of emanating a greenish light. It looked away from me and got back to what appeared to be working away on a computer of sorts. I couldn't really see because it was below the mattress line. I didn't know what to think, so I rolled over. I processed what I thought I saw, rationalized it must have been a dream, rubbed my eyes, and looked over again. And it was still there looking at their computer screen. At this point I realized I was fully awake and totally unsure of what I was seeing, so I called out. I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep as fast as possible. My dad never stirred and was passed out the entire time. There was no noise from this being. Any insight into what I might have seen and why would be much appreciated. The only real paranormal experience I had was 16 years ago, and I will never forget it. So for a little bit of backstory, I am now 26, this happened when I was 10 years old. My family, up until about the age of 10, was completely not religious, but around the age of 10, my parents started to become more religiously involved. Also, I come from a pretty big family, 8 kids in total, I'm not sure if that matters. I am the 4th oldest. My family and I were grateful enough to have a summer property that we were able to get away to every single year since I could remember. My mother and grandparents also grew up on this property. We had a long list of relatives, including our cousins, my mom's cousins, aunts, and uncles. All of these properties were located in the same area. The specific property where my parents, my siblings, and I stayed was owned by my grandfather since the late 1960s. All the properties in this small community were located close to each other, but the heavily wooded areas surrounding them created the perfect setting for very creepy, spooky nights, especially for a 10-year-old boy like me. The building on the property we were staying at had a small mudroom when you walked in, connected to the living room with a mini kitchen and a hallway that led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. On this particular night, only my brother, who is 1 year older than me, my mother, and my sister, who is a couple of years younger than me, were staying at the property. My mother was sleeping on the couch. My sister was sleeping on the ground directly below our mother, while my brother and I were sleeping 7 feet away in the mudroom, which had been converted into a sleeping area. All of us were in close proximity to each other and easily visible. We had all gone to bed, and at some random point throughout the night, if I had to guess between 2 and 4 in the morning, I woke up. My brother was right next to me, so I took notice of him, and I glanced over to see my mom on the couch and my sister right under her. As I was lying there probably 10 to 15 minutes later just attempting to go back to sleep, I heard the closet door open and bags like chips and pretzels and such being rummaged through. From where I was lying, the closet was directly around the corner from the hallway, about 3 inches away, which was probably a good 8 feet from us. Immediately, I glanced back over to my mom and my sister. It was pretty dark, but I thought I didn't see my sister there anymore, so I figured it was just her. I lay there silently, though after a good 10 minutes of rummaging around, I glanced back up and noticed my sister was still sleeping under my mother as she was the entire time. As you could imagine, this immediately sent me into a panic because it was only us in the building, and all of us were still in the exact same spots, but I had clearly heard the closet door open and stuff being rummaged through. Me being a 10-year-old, I put the blanket over my head and forced myself to go back to bed eventually. The next morning I started to express to my brother what I had experienced that night, expecting us both to laugh it off, but he then proceeded to confess to me that during the night, at some point, he had been woken up as well, and he had seen a black figure or shadow right near the corner of that hallway, and that he was petrified and scared, so he forced himself to go back to bed. That morning, I was more scared when my brother and I shared our experiences than I was that night, as I realized something truly otherworldly had happened. I have also participated in activities such as using Ouija boards, watching scary movies, and engaging in other typical childhood pastimes during that period, so I am unsure whether my experience originated from those activities or if it was a separate occurrence. However, the story I just shared is the only time I can confirm with certainty that I genuinely encountered something paranormal. Was told not to whistle at night. I remember last spring, I went camping with friends. As the night wound down, I was tidying around the camp, whistling as I did so. Most of my mates were already in their tents. You know how quiet it is in the mountains? I heard whistling too, some minutes after I did so. And it sounded loud and near, so I thought it was one of my mates joining in on the whistling. I thought nothing of it. What's wrong with a whistle, right? As we were having breakfast, I casually mentioned it to them, asking who also slept late and kept me company by whistling. They all stopped and stared. No one was up late, and no one whistled. And they told me to never, ever whistle again in the dark. Even though we still had other plans in that area, they hurriedly packed up. Now last night, the weather kind of cleared up a bit, I saw the moon for a short while. I felt happy and whistled a happy tune. I was on the porch. I live alone, and around 2 a.m.-ish, I heard whistling. It was the same happy tune I did. Now it wasn't any particular tune or anything, but I know I was whistling that a few hours earlier. What is it about whistling in the dark? Can something as plain as a whistle do something sinister? I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. This is really long, but this is a 100% true story. 25 years ago I moved in with my cousin and her roommate/co-worker Jose. The house was an old cement block, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house with a large fenced yard. He had 2 very large German shepherds that lived there and were mostly in the yard. The house is in Carmel, Florida, in a shitty, packed suburban neighborhood. Nothing special. Rent was cheap. The rent was $50 a week, if I remember correctly, and the house was clean. Plus my cousin lived there too. So I moved in. We all got along well. Everyone worked. We pretty much kept to ourselves and saw each other for a few minutes here and there. I lived there for about 6 months. This is the story of what caused me to move out. On a weekend night we all happened to be off from work. We decided to invite some friends over from the pool hall that we frequented, and Jose invited some people over that they worked with at the pharmaceutical lab. There were probably 20 people there total. We played music and did what young people do. Eventually it got pretty late, and we found ourselves talking about ghosts. We all shared stories. My cousin and I come from a pretty spooky family, so we had some good ones, and everybody was really into the discussion. Jose was quiet throughout most of the conversation. He waited until we all kind of quieted down and then said, "This house is haunted." My cousin and I shot each other a look and then both laughed because, yeah, sometimes Jose's 20-pound house cat would meow at the empty hallway. But that was it. He proceeded to tell us that there was a presence in the house but that it mostly stayed in the shed in the backyard. This tiny little pink wooden shed that I had never even looked in. He told us that he always keeps the curtains in his bedroom closed because his window faces the shed and the door to the shed will not stay shut. He has jammed it shut a million times, and it always pops back open. It creeps him out. He said he could tell when it was in the house because he would wake up feeling depressed. It creeped me out. I didn't want to think that I lived with a presence, and I didn't like the idea that it was hurting my roommate. I was a tough chick in my opinion, and I was like, F that ghost. I'll shut that door, and you won't have to keep your curtains closed anymore. I said all this because in my heart I didn't really believe that anything was in the shed or the house. I believed that we were ducking around. So I told them all that I was going outside to inspect the shed and deal with the door. Everyone followed me, and while we were walking around the outside of the house, Jose told me that it was a bad idea to mess with the shed. That whatever it was wanted that door open, and I should just leave it alone. We all got out there, and it was exactly what I thought it was going to be, a very worn down wooden shed that oddly kind of looked like a tiny house more than a shed. I looked inside, and there was a busted lawnmower and some old paint buckets, some rusty screens, and darkness. I looked around outside and found some rusty shovels in a corner of the garage area. I took a shovel over to the shed. I kicked the door of the shed back into the frame. The door was closed and literally kicked in from the frame. Kicked shut. I took the handle of the shovel and put it under the handle of the shed door. I shoved that into the ground. It was secure. We all went back inside. We bullshitted some more, but it was late. I'm going to say 1 a.m. by the time we go back in and everyone has kind of said their goodbyes. We let the dogs out of their pen in the yard and locked the gate. We made sure the front gate was secured so they wouldn't get out, and then we straightened up the house a little, and eventually all went to bed. Sometime around 6 a.m. I woke up because I needed to pee. I opened my bedroom door, and I was sleepy still, but there was a weird sound as I opened the door. It startled me. Like fingernails scraping something coarse. I opened the door all the way, and the shovel fell in the door and hit me. I can't even put into words how I felt in that moment. The shovel had been standing against my bedroom door. There was a tiny pile of dirt where the tip had been sitting against the tile floor of the hallway. I rushed through the house. To the side door, which was locked, and then out to the backyard. The shed door was wide open. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I ran back into the house. I immediately pounded on both Jose and my cousin's bedroom doors. I was terrified and angry. I knew, absolutely knew that one of them had done this. I know that you, dear reader, couldn't be there to see the reactions, but I promise you neither of them did it. Jose literally started to weep. He begged me to tell him I was lying. He begged my cousin to admit that she had done it. When neither of us would take responsibility, he went to the store and got a bunch of religious candles, produced a rosary, and started trying to pray whatever it was away. Or pray for me for being so stupid. My Spanish wasn't even close to fluent enough to keep up with his prayers. My cousin, on the other hand, was pissed. She was ready to fight me. She was adamant that I was pulling a prank. She cussed me up and down. She called me a liar, and she said I was a child. Most of all, She didn't appreciate being woken up at 6 a.m. after a night of partying to be a pawn in my prank. When I knew that neither of them had put the shovel against the door or reopened the shed door, I was literally terrified. There was no way someone else got into the yard, past the dogs, got the shed door open, and then got into the locked house to put that shovel against my door. I didn't sleep there again without someone else in the room with me. Every moment spent there after that was beyond tense. We all kind of stopped talking to each other, and Jose and my cousin ended up in a terrible argument over a button on the stereo, and she moved out within a week. It took me 2 weeks to find another place to live. I never went back. One of the houses that I used to live in was a convent, nunnery. One day I walked into my house, all the doors of the cabinets were opened and all the doors too. My mother would close all doors, it was a thing that she had. When I walked in, all the dishes were broken perfectly. For example, if you can glue the pieces back together, it only applies to the dishes. That same night, like I said, my mom would close all doors of the house, including the bathroom. Naturally, everyone blamed me for the broken dishes. I told my parents about it, and no one believed me. The same night the doorknob of my bedroom started to shake like someone was trying to come in. I locked the door on purpose, I was scared. Every night in the middle of the night my doorknob, purposefully, would shake. I thought it was my mom trying to get in my room, but no. It wasn't her at all. One night I got exhausted, and I balled up some courage, and I opened the door, and I screamed, "Stop it, go away." I saw a man with a black dress. I got scared and closed the door again. I cried myself to sleep because that thing wasn't bothering anyone in the house, it was just me. Out of 5 people in the house, it was just me. I think something from my neighborhood is attached to me. 22 years later, my family is experiencing it too. Before my neighborhood was built, there was a family farm on the property. Supposedly their daughter died there. I grew up hearing that story but never thought much of it. When I was little, I was always terrified to sleep in my room. I felt like someone was watching me, so I would sleep in my parents' room. One night, when I was around 9 or 10, I was sleeping on my parents' floor and woke up to see a little girl laying behind my mom, almost spooning her, holding an old-fashioned doll that was almost identical to the one we had in our basement. She was staring directly at me. I screamed and woke my mom up. No one was there. My mom and dad brushed it off. After that I never saw her again, but as I got older weird things started happening around me. My things, like jewelry and specific clothing with meaning behind them, would go missing for months and then reappear perfectly placed in my room. My parents swore they hadn't touched them or knew how they would reappear. My TV would randomly turn on to different channels when the remote was across the room. Lights turning on and off. No one else in my family experienced anything for 22 years. But other people in my neighborhood have said they've heard a little girl giggling or footsteps when no kids were around. So I always wondered if whatever it was had attached itself to me specifically. Recently things started happening again, except now other people are noticing. About 6 months ago I went home, and the bathroom connected to my room was locked even though no one had been in there. I unlocked it, walked away for a minute, came back, and it was locked again, and my boyfriend saw this happen. A couple months later my boyfriend and I tried to leave through the garage, and the door handle wouldn't open at all. We both tried for several minutes, turning the locks every way. Then suddenly it just opened like nothing was wrong. A month later, the same thing happened again with my dad and me. Our handle is not broken, and we have never had issues with it before. My mom has also started sending me videos of lights flickering in the house. Then tonight something happened that really freaked her out. She got into her car, and when she buckled her seatbelt, she said it felt like someone was behind her and grabbed it and pulled hard. She turned around and no one was there. For years I thought this was just something around me, but now other people are experiencing things too. For people who believe in this stuff, does this sound like something that could be attached to a person instead of a house? And is it possible for activity to escalate over time? I honestly don't know what to think anymore. I still don't have an explanation for what I saw, but as a kid, I couldn't have been older than 5 at that point. I saw something that still makes me feel so wrong deep down. We had to stop on a trip to the Scotts Bluff Zoo due to a tornado situation, causing us to more or less hide out in a small hotel. My mom, my sister, my stepsister, my nephew, and I were all squeezing into a room, and of course, being the youngest, note, blended family with large age gaps, my nephew is my half-brother's oldest son and was about 3 or so years older than me. I wanted to play gorillas because that's what we'd gotten to see earlier before the storm hit. My mom noted we were out of ice and asked if anyone wanted to go with to get some more. I chose to follow my mom down to get the ice, thinking nothing of it. The ice machine was in what I would describe as a small closet almost, and I kept ducking in and out of the room while Mom waited for the machine to get moving. After about the third or fourth time I peeked out, I saw something with a hunched back, and it was inky black. It had a shine from the lights, but nothing else I could identify it by. Little me screamed bloody murder and booked it back to the room without having memorized the number on our door. I was gone before my mom even noticed, but she knew whatever it was had absolutely terrified me. She'd never seen me so ghostly pale, and she always tells me about how I looked like a porcelain doll while I was growing up. Whatever it was, it still makes me afraid, and I've witnessed much stranger and scarier things since then. FFS, I swear on my life I can smell death and sense when someone's passed on before I get the news. All I know is I've never seen whatever it was since, but I still get chicken skin when I think about it and my stomach churns like I ate bad takeout. I would definitely share more experiences, but that particular one has left a lasting impression on me. A visitor who never left. I was 18 years old, when this happened. At the time, I was living at home with my parents, who had recently moved far out into the countryside. Their farm was part of a tiny rural cluster, about 7 farms on one road. That night, I was home alone with our dog, a large Labrador I was looking after until my parents came back the next day. It was around 11 p.m. I was lying on the upstairs couch with a movie playing quietly on the TV, half asleep and relaxed in the stillness of the house. Then 3 loud knocks shattered the silence. They came from the front door downstairs, the door directly at the bottom of the staircase leading up to where I was. The sound was sharp and deliberate, not hesitant, not accidental. My dog sprang out of his bed beside me and started barking immediately. I tried to calm him, but he was beyond listening. He bolted down the stairs and positioned himself in front of the door, barking and growling into the darkness. Outside, the courtyard was completely black. I stood halfway down the staircase, my pulse hammering in my ears, and called out, "Hello?" No reply. Just silence. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The quiet that followed felt wrong, thick and watchful. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, I forced myself to move. I stepped down the rest of the stairs, my dog still tense at the door. Carefully, I opened it just enough to lean my head outside. There was nothing there. No lights. No movement. No footsteps fading away. Only the dark courtyard and the cold night air. It felt like whoever, or whatever, had knocked had simply vanished. I shut the door quickly and locked every entrance in the house. My hands were shaking as I called my parents. They immediately contacted our neighbors, a couple who lived nearby. Within minutes, they arrived. I explained what had happened, still trying to steady my voice. They decided to walk around the barns and check the property. Those 10 minutes felt endless. When they returned, they said they hadn't found anything. Still, they strongly suggested I come sleep in their guest room for the night. I told them it was probably just me overreacting if nothing had been found. But they kept insisting, more seriously than I expected, that it would be safer to come with them. I refused. I couldn't leave my dog alone. Before leaving, they told me to call immediately if anything else happened, no matter how small. When my parents returned the next day, they installed surveillance cameras outside the front door. They said it was to make me feel safer, especially since I was often home alone with the dog. A few months later, my parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. During the evening, I found myself talking with my female neighbor and thanked her again for coming over that night. Her expression shifted. She went quiet for a moment, like she was weighing whether to say what was on her mind. Then she told me she had to be honest with me. That night, shortly before my parents called her, she had been outside saying goodnight to her horses. The yard was completely still, no wind, no distant cars, nothing. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps crunching through the gravel in our courtyard. Not random. Not hurried. Slow. Controlled. Like someone walking with purpose in the dark. She said the sound carried unnaturally well in the silence. Then the footsteps stopped. Right there in the yard. She waited to hear them continue. To hear someone speak. A door. Anything. But there was only a heavy, suffocating silence. And just moments later, my parents called her about the knocking. She told me she never heard those footsteps leave. My childhood, I just want to get it off my chest. When I was about 7 years old, we moved to a hobby farm in regional Victoria, Australia. We lived there for 5 years, and during that time, I vividly remember, on multiple occasions, waking up during the night and seeing a black shadowy thing in the corner of my room. It wasn't exactly a defined shape or anything, and I would end up covering my head with my blankets and going back to sleep. On a few occasions, I remember waking up with this thing hovering over me. I do remember it grabbing me and shaking me. I did try to tell my mom about it at the time, and she just dismissed me. After that, whenever it happened, I never mentioned it to anyone. We eventually moved out of the house, and I never experienced the shaking or saw anything like it again. Skip forward about 25 years, my wife and kids moved into a double-story house. Our bedroom is upstairs with an open-plan kitchen and dining room, and the kids, 6 and 4-year-olds, bedrooms are all downstairs. On multiple occasions, I woke up hearing footsteps downstairs. I would run downstairs, check on the kids, and make sure all the windows and doors were still locked. We also had an alarm with sensors everywhere so I would know if it was an intruder. Nothing was ever out of place, and the kids were always sound asleep. One night when it happened, I was downstairs checking on the kids, and I heard the footsteps go up the stairs and then start walking around in the dining/kitchen area. I bolted back up the stairs, and nothing was there. I checked on my wife, and she too was sound asleep. We eventually moved out of that house and haven't experienced anything like that again. I can't fully explain either of my experiences as a kid or adult, but I am 100% certain they both happened. It's nice to get it off my chest, as I am sure if I told anyone now, they would think I am crazy. I was in high school, and I fell asleep in my mom's bed watching TV. In the middle of the night I woke up with a weird feeling. I looked up at the clock, and it was something like 3 in the morning. I can't explain it, it was just this really weird bad aura. I was very religious at the time, so I started praying. The more I started praying, the more intense it got. My eyes were closed tightly shut because I was scared, but at one point I remember opening my eyes a little bit and seeing red eyes. I kid you not, it was like this glowing red. It did not look human in any way, it looked demonic. Honestly, I don't think it was a ghost, I think it was some type of demon spirit. Anyways, I continued praying, and the next thing I knew, I heard this low demonic sounding voice, and it said, "You're mine," like it was trying to claim me or something, so I just kept praying and praying with my eyes closed shut. I remember feeling weightless, but I was so deep in prayer it wasn't really on the forefront of my consciousness. The next thing I knew, I felt like I had dropped about 2 feet. The impact was intense enough for my body to bounce. Not like a normal jerk when you wake up from a crazy dream, I actually bounced, and my mom woke up too. We looked at the clock, and it read about 5 minutes after when I first checked it. For many years, I endeavored to convince myself that it was merely a dream. However, now, nearly 20 years later, I can sincerely state that I have never encountered anything similar, either before or since. Paranormal true story. When I was a little girl, I wanted a dog of my own more than anything I've ever wanted as an adult. And I've been desperate for money a few times. I mean, I wished for one every birthday and Christmas. I'd blow out someone else's candles, thinking I'd steal their wish, and wake up with a dog. I didn't care about the breed, gender, or age. I just wanted one. I fell in love with every dog I met. Made friends with friendly people in my neighborhood just to pet their dog. At family gatherings, I'd flock to the dogs. My mom's sisters all had one at each of their houses. I did what I could to convince my parents that I was responsible enough to have one. I read every single book at my elementary school library that was about dogs. How to care for them, different breeds, or just a fictional story of a dog, even if there is just one on the cover. Rented every single movie at Blockbuster that involved dogs. You get the point. Everyone that met me knew I wanted a dog. Wasn't hard to tell. But my dad wouldn't budge. He had a dog once upon a time and was really attached to it, and it died when it was less than a year old. So he just didn't want anything to do with dogs. No matter how much I wanted one. One day, my mom got a call from one of her sisters, saying she needed her dog, Spot, to be taken in for a little while. My mom somehow convinced my dad, and our landlord was totally fine with it. So Spot came to stay, and yeah, I knew he wasn't my dog, but that didn't stop me from treating him like he was. I was always with him. My parents lived right next to my elementary school, so during breakfast, recess, or lunch, I'd always walk behind the swings to the backyard fence and say hi to him. Also, to make sure none of the other kids were throwing rocks, they'd do that because they'd say it was haunted. Spot loved attention and exploring. He was pretty old, but he sure loved to climb the tree in the backyard. He'd climb it and look over the fence to see the kids at school. Even when I'd go next door to play with my neighbors. He'd look over the brick wall while I played in their yard. He wouldn't whine or bark, he'd just make himself comfortable and watch, almost like he was looking after me. Then he started making his way to the front gate when he realized it connected to the backyard. The landlord didn't like that, so my dad started tying him up to the tree he always climbed when we'd leave. We didn't have a car, so we'd be gone for long periods of time. One day we went to the grocery store, and I convinced my parents to let me get these Scooby Doggy snacks for Spot. I couldn't wait for him to try them. When we got to the house, the neighbor lady walked up to my parents, speaking Spanish. My dad unlocked the front door and demanded my brother and I go straight to bed, then he went back out the front door. I came out of my room and quietly went to the backyard to give Spot a Scooby snack. I walked by the tree and whispered his name a few times. I heard a strange sound, like a scrape. And I heard my mom calling for my dad on the other side of the brick wall, in the neighbor's yard. Grunting and asking if he was in the yard yet. Then I saw a fluffy body shoved over the brick wall, right at me. Eyes still open. Paws an inch from my face. I screamed. My dad appeared and yelled at me to go to my room. I went under the covers and cried myself to sleep. The next couple of days I was lifeless. Didn't smile, laugh, or want to play with my toys. During breakfast, recess, and lunch, I'd just sit in the dirt, next to a hole in the fence of my backyard, where I used to stick my hand to pet Spot. I knew what death was, but I'd never seen it before. That week, my dad had my brother and I do our regular chores. It was my turn to sweep the dining room. So I was sweeping under the blinds of where the backyard glass sliding door was. And there he was. Lying on the pavement, as he always did, looking right at me. Panting with his tongue out. Whitish blue but clear, like see-through. Almost smiling at me. And I felt this loving warmth as I blinked and rubbed my eyes, not believing what I just saw. As if to say, it's okay, don't be sad, I love you. I'm still right here. After that I snapped out of my funk and still loved every dog I met. I never saw him again, but that's okay. That one time was all I needed. But unfortunately, Spot showing himself to me in the afterlife opened the door for other things to show themselves. Stay tuned, and thanks for listening. My first experience with the paranormal was at age 10 at a Bible summer camp. In the year 2000, when I was 10 years old, my parents sent me to a 5-day summer camp in Huntsville, Ontario. This camp was undoubtedly a Bible camp, and despite my upbringing without religion, I managed to get along well with my peers. 7 other girls and I were staying in the room on the far right, while 3 other rooms were located on the main floor, and the camp counselors bunked upstairs. The main floor had a very high ceiling, and near the top was a small square door that attached to where the camp counselors were staying. I was staying along the right wall on the bottom bunk. On the 3rd night my bunkmates and I were having a blast just talking and telling jokes, but our camp counselor opened the little door at the top of the room and told us to be quiet, so we all went to bed. Out of nowhere, I hear Brianna yelling, "Cat, wake up right now. Cat, wake up," and being the light sleeper I was, I immediately woke up. I didn't know how long I had slept for. I then hear Angel saying, "Cat, look over to the bunk in front of you." I was facing the wall, so I turned around and saw a black figure with long, curly hair sitting on the ladder leading up to the top bunk on the bed in front of mine. The moonlight illuminated the entire room, and this figure was completely opaque, shaking her long, curly hair. I think it was hers? I looked around the room and noticed that all of the girls were accounted for and definitely awake. I stared at this thing for what seemed like an eternity. Every one of the girls was being completely hysterical and crying, but I was dead silent. I couldn't make a peep. I was completely terrified to the point I couldn't blink or even move. I mean, what could I have done? The thing was sitting there right before my eyes. Then this figure stands up and jumps off of the ladder and just stands at the edge of the bed for a moment. All of the girls are screaming, "Cat, get out of there now." To which the figure moved around in almost a robotic way and started walking towards me. I finally then found the nerve to book it out of the bottom bunk and run to the other side of the room. I run up to Brianna's and Angel's bunks and climb the ladder as quickly as I can. At this point I started becoming hysterical and crying like the rest of them. The figure was still standing near my bed. Angel and I started hugging, and I was too afraid to even open my eyes after what I had seen. Angel decides to jump down off of the bunk and turn the light on, and the figure is gone. I guess we've made a lot of noise, and the camp counselor opened the little door and told us to keep it down. We had told her what we'd seen, and she came downstairs to investigate. She came into the room and told us, "There's nothing here, your mind was probably playing tricks on you. Back to bed now." All of the girls, including myself, in the room were still pretty upset and scared and just sat up in our bunks talking about what we had seen. About 5 minutes after, we hear screams coming from the room directly across the hall from us. We all started crying again, and the camp counselor opened the little door and told us, "See what you've started, you have everyone in the cabin scared." The camp counselor went to investigate, and we turned on the lights in our room and opened the door. We hear one of the girls in the room across from ours say while crying, "Something lifted our bunk, please don't make us stay in here. It's going to kill us." To which the counselor sternly responded, "That's impossible, now quiet down and go to bed. This is the last time I'm going to say this." After about 20 minutes of quietly talking, we all went to bed. Nothing else strange happened for the duration of the camp trip. I had exchanged phone numbers with the girls. About a week after the camp trip had ended, I contacted both Angel and Brianna and asked them if they remembered that night, and they both said yes, and they said they'd never forget it. This was the very first experience I had with the paranormal, but certainly not the last. The ghost tried to hide when it saw me. This happened around a year ago. Mind you, I wasn't home alone, nor was it late. I was eating in my room while my mother was watching TV in the living room. When I finished what was on my plate, I got up to put the plate in the dishwasher. When I reached my door, I felt this eerie and creeping feeling in my gut. It made me stop for a second, but I just brushed it off as my anxiety being weird. When you open my bedroom's door, there is a hallway, and right across from my room is my parents' room. So I stepped in the hallway and I stopped dead in my tracks because there was something in my parents' room. It was a black figure. Tall and thin, it looked like a human. The incident was scary because when I looked at this supernatural being, it ducked. It tried to hide from me. I was confused and terrified at the same time. I am a big horror movie fan, so I knew investigating was never a good choice. So after standing there frozen for a minute, I could still see the figure on the ground at this point. I went to the kitchen. As I cleaned the things in my hand, my mind was making all kinds of scenarios. We moved to this house 5 years ago, and I never liked this place, especially my parents' room. It has a closet room, which we use for extra space for unused items and furniture, and there is a big mirror in the room. My parents have a closet in their room, and all the doors of this closet are mirrors. Even now, I still feel uncomfortable when I stay in that room for an extended period. If anything paranormal were to happen, this room would be the portal of it. I am 100% sure about it. Anyways, back to the story, I finally got the courage to go back and check the room to see if it was there or not. Obviously it wasn't there. I turned on the light and just stood in the doorway. I felt sick to my stomach, knowing no one would believe me, and there was something here that we didn't invite. I still think about the creature I saw. Why did it hide from me? What was the motive? Was I the scary creature in its eyes? Why would it duck when it saw me? The historic haunted piano. I used to be in the US military, and over the years my wife, our 2 dogs, and I lived in some very haunted locations in several different countries. This first story takes place in England. We had the great fortune to rent an incredible home in a building that's nearly 700 years old. It was built into the massive wall surrounding the grounds of a famous historical church. The interior of the home was completely renovated and modernized, so despite being so old, it was actually quite comfortable. Plus, it was amazing. For instance, we had 2 large bedrooms with antique casement windows, 15-foot ceilings, chandeliers, and handmade crown molding. The home had 3 floors plus a creepy old cellar, 4 bedrooms, and every room in the house had its own fireplace, even the master bathroom. And, of course, the place was also haunted AF. On our first day there, one of the groundskeepers dropped by to introduce himself and say hello. We chatted for a bit about this and that, and as he was about to leave, he said, "You know this place has ghosts, right?" We told him we'd be surprised if a place this old didn't have a few ghosts, but so long as they didn't bother us, we wouldn't bother them. We had no idea at the time, though, how soon they'd be saying hello too. Like I said, this place was built into a massive wall. The wall's interior encircled the church grounds, while its exterior faced the bustling high street, teeming with local businesses. Some of these businesses were also built into the wall, and our next door neighbor on one side was a dance studio, 1 floor up from street level. On many afternoons the dance studio taught classes, and through the thick wall between us we could hear the thudding footfalls of kids jumping around on the wooden floor, practicing their ballet steps. Our furniture was being shipped from Japan, where we lived previously, so initially all we had was what we brought on the airplane with us when we moved, a few chairs, and a blow-up mattress. We chose the largest bedroom, which had windows facing the high street and a wall shared with the dance studio. The first night we stayed in the home, it didn't seem creepy at all. It felt like we were in a beautiful, cozy fairy tale castle, and we still couldn't believe our luck. Plus, we had our 2 dogs with us, and we figured they would react and protect us if anything weird should happen. As we settled in around 10:30 p.m., we could even faintly hear someone playing an unfamiliar piece of lovely classical music on the piano in the dance studio next door. We remarked to one another that if the neighbors were going to make noise at night, this was a wonderful type of noise to have. After perhaps half an hour, the music ended, and the dogs and us all drifted off to sleep. About a month later, we signed up for a ghost tour, which was a nighttime stroll around the middle of town with a guide telling local ghost stories and highlighting elements of the area's history. Before the tour, we said, wouldn't it be cool if they told a story about where we live? Let's not mention which place is ours, just to see if they say anything. As we strolled down the high street with our guide, he actually stopped right in front of our place. We stayed quiet, waiting to see what he would say. He started telling a story about the place next door, explaining that the dance studio used to be the choiry, where centuries ago the church choir used to rehearse their singing and their music. Sometimes, late at night, long after the dance studio has closed and when there's nobody inside, people hear the piano being played. We immediately spoke up, explained that we lived next door, and told the story of the beautiful music we heard that first night in the home. Our guide was thrilled, and he said he was going to incorporate our story into his tours from that night forward. However, we were still skeptical. After all, it is a dance studio, equipped with a piano, and it is possible that someone was simply practicing that evening. Right? So, the next day my wife went over to the dance studio to say hello. She informed them that we resided next door, clarified that we could hear the children playing on some afternoons, and inquired whether anyone was present making noise late at night. They told us not to worry, because the studio closed around 8 p.m. and nobody was ever there past 9 p.m. at the latest. My wife asked if the piano we heard after 10 p.m. our first night was theirs. The people at the front desk looked at each other, looked at my wife, looked at each other again, and then told her no. Not. None of them were ever there that late, especially not playing the piano. I had a friend that lived with me, her and her 18-year-old son, for a month and a half until the apartment they now live in was ready. She's from a long line of mountain witches on both sides and could genuinely become a medium if she wanted to. She very much doesn't. But she had a pack of tarot cards that she would read incessantly, as something between a self-soothing habit and a fidget. Sometimes she wouldn't even ask the cards a question, just start flipping through to see what cards she landed on. When she had been there for a couple of weeks, things started getting spooky in the apartment. Noises that weren't normal, shapes out of the corner of your eye, cabinet doors open that you swore you closed, that sort of thing. I asked her to calm it with the cards, and she agreed, but again, by that time it was more of a habit than anything, and she didn't slow down at all. One evening we were sitting in the living room and watching TV when her son came in the room and did that thing guys do sometimes where they stand there and watch as well. After a few seconds, I looked over to the doorway, but there was no one there. And then I played back what I saw, and, yeah, it didn't make sense. Her son was 18 at the time and is a big guy. This person I saw had short ginger hair, her son has long brunette hair, was middle-aged, and was wearing something cream-colored and with a collar but with a weird texture. I couldn't tell from the brief look I saw, but the closest I could think of was a trench coat. Spooked, I told her what I had just seen, and we both had a moment where we acknowledged that it had been creepy. I again asked her to cool it with the cards. She complied for a couple days and then was back at it. Not long after that, she and her son moved into her new apartment. All was well, except the spookies followed her. After she left, my apartment was suddenly quiet, and I had zero experiences I couldn't explain. Then, about a week after she moved in, she called me in a panic. She had woken in the middle of the night to see a man standing over her bed and watching her sleep. She had freaked out and turned on the light, except as soon as her lamp turned on, the figure disappeared. She started describing the figure as tall and lanky, and I had a thought. Was he a middle-aged ginger man? I asked her. I don't know, I couldn't see his face, she replied. It was in shadow. But he was wearing yellow pajamas, the old-fashioned kind that button up with a collar, and they had small little flowers printed on them. I suddenly realized that the weird texture I had noticed on the man I saw weeks before was actually the little flowers on his pajamas. They were little flowers. It was the same man, wearing the same outfit. I told her this, that it was the same man I had seen a few weeks before. He had followed her to her new apartment. She put the cards away after that. And the spooky stopped. My childhood home. I was about 10 years old when my family moved into this quaint, pink, English cottage-style home built in the early 1920s in North Texas. I loved this little house and felt at home as soon as we moved in. I recall the day we moved in, I experienced occasional gusts of cool air. My mom always said the house was old and, therefore, drafty. For some reason, I never felt alone in the house. Some rooms gave me an uneasy feeling, and I refused to be in certain rooms all by myself, like the sunroom or the basement. I could never explain why. It was just a chill in your spine sort of feeling. The rooms in this home were all completely separated. The front door opened to the living room with a sunroom to the left. You'd enter the dining room through a door that had a door to the kitchen and a door to the main hallway. The main hallway had 3 bedrooms on one side and a bathroom on each end. Each bathroom had 2 doors, one to the bedroom they were next to and one to the hallway. I slept in the middle room. Within a few days of living in this little house, my brother stopped sleeping with the lights off. He insisted on leaving all the lights in his room on because he said he'd hear someone at night. My parents brushed it off as a phase. I started sleeping with my closet door wide open and the light on. Again, my parents thought it was a phase. At night both my brother and I would hear small footsteps in the hallway and in our rooms as if someone were coming in to check on us. They'd always stop at the foot of our beds. We'd tell our parents, and my father would always say, "Old houses make strange noises." My mother became extremely depressed within the first month of living in this home. She'd tell my dad she felt as if she had lost a child. She had no idea why she struggled so much to get out of bed. Soon, she started hearing the footsteps in the hallway as well. Our family dog would bark in the hallway as if there was an intruder at random times of the day and night, and nothing would ever be there. Footsteps became louder, more obvious, and occurred more often. My mother would hear them during the day while I and my brother were at school and my father was at work. She called my father a few times afraid someone was in the house. She had called the police one time because she heard loud banging noises and footsteps while she was in the kitchen. No signs of any intruders or unexpected guests. My friends started refusing to spend the night because they'd say my house was creepy. I never took offense because I, too, thought it was creepy. One night, my father finally heard the footsteps as he was woken up by my mother in the middle of the night. She shook my father awake. "Brad. Brad, do you hear that? Be quiet and listen." The dog started barking like she was ready to attack. Finally, he had heard the footsteps, and he told my mother, "Get the kids." He thought someone had broken in. He grabbed the metal baseball bat he always kept under the bed and began inspecting the house. He told me when he walked into the hallway, he felt a sudden rush of air go past him, like someone had run by him quickly. Nothing was there. He started hearing the footsteps again in the hallway all around him. He finally believed my mother, that the house could be haunted. I and my brother were sound asleep, so he went back to bed, and he and my mother stayed up all night just listening and waiting. A few more weeks passed without any encounters or instances. But we'd noticed strange things throughout the house, like things going missing, electronic items not working properly, and the gas stove igniting itself. We'd blame it all on the little boy ghost that must love to play pranks. We just had a strange feeling a young boy lived with us. More time passed with more strange occurrences. The hallway light would turn on and off randomly. My parents assumed that the hallway light, which was not flickering but simply turning off and on repeatedly, was a simple electrical problem. The longer we ignored it and let it be, the more often it would happen and the more severe it would be. One night around 2 a.m. it started turning on and off again. I also had a toy doorbell I had gotten from school for selling magazines on my wall at my bedroom door. I was obsessed with monkeys at this time, so the doorbell made a monkey sound. Yes, I was a weird little kid, okay? This doorbell started ringing in the middle of the night. I sat straight up in bed and screamed, "Mom! Dad!" My dad came running in and was just as freaked out as I was about the doorbell. No one was ringing it. The button wasn't stuck. He took the batteries out and told me everything was fine. Well, let me tell you. 20 minutes after we all went back to bed that Mother Ducker rang again and again. Ooh ooh ah ah. Ooh ooh ah ah. I sat straight up and screamed again, and my dad had already reacted so quickly. He ripped that thing off the wall, wrapped it in a towel, and shoved the thing in my dresser drawer. He said, "We shouldn't hear again. That ducking thing ooh ooh ah ah ed again, wrapped up in my dresser drawer." We heard that thing muffled and quiet, but we heard it. I've never seen my dad's eyes get so wide in my life, even to this day. He pulled that thing out of my dresser drawer and threw it out the window down the driveway. My mom and little brother were in the hallway witnessing all the drama unfold. That night, we all slept together in my parents' bedroom. The morning after, my parents knocked on the neighbor's door to see if they had heard about any strange stories about our house or anyone else's. The neighbors just responded, "Yeah, we've heard stories. There's a home down the street where the owners hear a piano play every day at 4 p.m. The owners before you moved out of the house 2 months after they bought it. We had lived there for about 9 to 10 months. Needless to say, my parents put the house up for sale that day. No one bought it, so they eventually put it up for rent, as it's close to a university. We still get stories, and they're all very similar to our own. I was taking care of my aunt's house while she was out of town a few years ago. It was an old country house, a little creaky and quiet, but nothing seemed strange until about 2:30 a.m. one night. I heard footsteps when I woke up. There were heavy, purposeful footsteps in the hallway outside my door, not just slight creaks. Right outside my door, the steps stopped, and I thought it was just the house settling. I was frozen. A sliver of moonlight came through the window, enough to dimly illuminate beneath the door, but the hallway light was off. It was then that I saw two still shadows of feet. Thinking that perhaps a neighbor had entered, I called out. No response. Just silence. Then, slowly, the feet turned away. And they walked back down the hallway. I finally mustered the courage to open the door, but the hallway was empty. I checked the locks, they were still bolted from the inside. No signs of entry. No one ever broke in. Nothing was stolen. My aunt later told me that her late husband, who passed away in that house, always paced that hallway when he couldn't sleep. To this day, I still don't know what I saw. But I've never stayed there again. It was the exact moment my heart went cold. One day, back when I was in school, my biology teacher was done teaching, and we were told to copy the notes provided on the blackboard in our books. As we were doing that, she walked around the class to check if we were actually copying, and then suddenly, she looked outside the window. She starts to panic. She rushed to the class next to ours, brought the other teacher in, and made her see out the window too. Both were terrified. They both just started closing the windows of our class and told us not to look out. Our teacher even clicked a pic of that specific visual. Our biology teacher and I shared a close rapport, as I have a strong passion for science, and she held a favorable view of me among my classmates. I asked her about the incident that occurred 2 days earlier, and she showed me the picture she had taken. It was a human-like figure on top of a building that had very long hair. It was simple to look at but complicated to understand and explain if it really was a person. Something seemed off. At the same time, due to the picture being zoomed in, the quality was ruined. She told me that the figure was moving weirdly. She described the figure's movements as slow, robotic, and glitchy. The building that figure was standing on was literally the building next to the one I and my family lived in. I was freaked out. My home was very close to my school and was easily visible from the windows of our classrooms. Then I asked her why she didn't take a video instead, and she replied that the figure was already moving towards the steps to go downstairs, so she just took a picture in a hurry. FYI, the building captured and our building are almost literally a few centimeters apart, and there's a huge gap through which the hallways of all the floors and their doors are easily visible to us and vice versa. A few weeks passed, someone exactly next door to us in that building moved in. After a few days, I was walking around outside our home door and saw a few people in that building. They were people who recently moved in. I noticed a man air drying his long hair. It was very long. Later I got to know that they are Punjabis. Sikh men grow their hair long due to their religious commitments, and that they moved here, to our city, for the first time just a few days ago. I learned that their family, who already lived in our city, had helped them find this place. I knew this because I saw their family members coming next door to discuss the rent with the owners. That's when it clicked. The next day, I reached my school very early. Before my classes even started, I waited for my teacher outside the staff room, and when she arrived, I asked her to show me the image she had clicked once again. It was him. Exactly him, tall, same length of hair, same physical personality. My heart went cold. I didn't understand what was happening, because there were just 5 to 7 families living in that building, and I knew every one of them. No person in that building was that tall. The image clearly showed a man in his mid-20s, but no such man lived in that building before this family moved in. I mentioned man because in the image captured there was a clear presence of a beard and mustache. To date, what happened? How did the person from the future creepily become visible standing on the same building he's going to move into? Why was that figure moving weirdly? Has anyone else met someone who might not have been real? When I was about 10 years old, something happened that I still can't explain. I've never really talked about it, but curiosity has really gotten the best of me, and I'd love to know if anyone has experienced anything even remotely similar. So, here is my story. Let's call it Crows. I grew up on a dead-end road where I spent every moment I could outside. I knew all the neighbors, everyone was really close with each other back then. I was particularly the type of child who would knock on everyone's doors in search of companionship. Our backyard was a long hill leading down into woods that stretched for acres. One day, while I was playing in my backyard, I noticed a girl around my age a couple of feet into the trees. She had tan skin and long black hair and wore clothes that didn't look modern. Almost like something from the past. I waved and said, "Hi." Because I was a friendly kid. She looked terrified and sprinted into the woods. I told my dad, and he said she was probably a neighbor, but I knew she wasn't. I knew all the kids on our road, and there wasn't a home for sale, a new build, or anything. But he still dismissed my claims. I thought maybe he's right, maybe she's just really shy. Still, I was too curious to just leave it alone. Who was she? The next morning I packed a bag with snacks, crackers and some fruit, and wrote her a note asking if she wanted to be friends, saying that I'm friendly, something along those lines. I left it where I saw her in the woods. I checked on the bag several times throughout the day and yelled for her into the trees, but she never showed. I went back out to check the next morning, and I was shocked to see that both the snacks and the note were gone. I thought about how it was a dumb plan because I had no way of knowing if an animal took it instead, but as I got closer, I noticed in their place was a small square of hand-stitched cloth, red and orange with a black crow in the center. I kept that cloth for years in my keepsake box. But since I moved, I can't seem to find it anywhere. I guess it's possible that I misplaced the cloth, but I have items in that box that I have kept since I was 5 years old. I take very good care of my belongings, so it seems strange to me that only that cloth is missing. That night I left another note saying, "Thank you for the crow," saying that I was friendly, and asking if she wanted to play. The next morning the note and snacks were gone, but nothing was left in return. I felt discouraged and started to walk home, but then I heard a hoo-hoo from the woods. I followed the sound deep into the woods, smart, I know, and suddenly stumbled into a large clearing I'd never seen before. It was midday and bright, so I could see everything perfectly. Toward the back of this large clearing was a tiny log cabin with fenced areas, chicken coops, stacks of wood, and a rocking chair by itself in the middle of the clearing, which, looking back now, is kinda strange. I thought it might be a hunting cabin, so I started to get nervous, but then the door opened and it was her. She waved me over. I ran to the door, she pointed to her chest and said, "Kieran." I quickly realized while trying to talk to her that English didn't seem like her first language, but we communicated the best we could. I remember her showing me a lot of crafts she made, all made out of things you could find in the woods. I wasn't allowed in her room, and she didn't seem to want to go outside to show me the chickens. She said, mainly using drawings, that she wasn't allowed to leave the clearing and that her ma and papa would be upset if they knew I was there. We drank some kind of herbal tea, I think. I remember it tasting like dirt, but I never said anything. I was polite. I don't remember our exact conversation, but when I asked where she was from, she said something like "Pa Liuj Hagd." I still don't know what that means, and to be honest, that might not even be the exact phrase she used, it's just what has stuck in my memory. The whole visit, especially how I got home, feels fuzzy now. The next thing I remember is walking through the woods with her humming a song, the cadence of which I would give anything to recall, as she led me to the area in front of my house. I just remember waking up the next day after that. I don't remember going up the hill, walking in, changing clothes, getting into bed, nothing. I told my stepbrother and a couple of friends, and surprisingly, they believed me, and they seemed super excited to meet her. We all wrote notes and packed snacks hoping she'd take them, but nothing happened. After a few days, we searched the woods and called out, but we were unable to locate the clearing. We wrote notes and tried different snacks and searched for the clearing for Kieran for weeks and then months. About 2 years later, after we had given up hope on finding Kieran or finding the clearing again, we were playing outside when we heard the same hoo-hoo. We all saw a girl in the trees before she ran away. I was so happy they saw her too. I wasn't crazy. We followed the sound deep into the woods, and I ended up in the clearing again. I looked over to say "told you" to my stepbrother and friend, but this time there was no cabin, no chickens, just grass. And my stepbrother and friend were suddenly gone. I experienced a surge of panic as I called out their names, and then I distinctly recall hearing crows cawing frantically, although I never actually saw any. I felt so scared in that moment, it still lives with me today. The sound was overwhelming, I couldn't think straight. I immediately ran back the way I came. I ran for what seemed like forever. I remember feeling panicked and wondering if I had taken the wrong path. I didn't run this deep into the woods. Why am I not out by now? I was terrified, even just thinking about it. I'm starting to shake. At all times, those crows were still as loud as ever. I never saw them, maybe because I was blinded by adrenaline and anxiety, but I ran right into my stepbrother and friend and knocked them over. Once we got our bearings, the crows stopped, and they were yelling at me. They were so angry, claiming I deserted them and they didn't know where to go. I tried explaining to them that I thought they'd been right behind me the whole time. They didn't listen, they thought I was messing with them and were so angry with me for running away from them, but I was and still am so confused about how that could have happened. I 100,000% do not remember running away from them. Why would I do that? We were all following the same noise, and I could hear their footsteps with me the whole time. It just doesn't make sense. When I got home, I faced significant trouble for scaring my stepbrother. He portrayed the situation as if I had abandoned him in the middle of the woods while he was crying, but of course, no one believed my version of the story. I was told to never go into the woods again, but to be honest, I was going to go back anyway. Either way, I know what I saw, what really happened. At the same time, though, I have no idea what happened. Several years went by, and as I got older, I got more curious and confused, so I went back to where the clearing should have been, but of course, it's nowhere to be found. What's strange, though, is I still heard crows in the area, and my boyfriend at the time didn't hear anything. It made me feel insane. Even now, for some reason, when I see a crow, I get a strange feeling, like it recognizes me. I can't explain it. I'm 29 now, so almost 20 years have passed, and I still can't stop thinking about it. Kieran, the crows, the clearing that appears and disappears, the log house, and the time loss/confusion. Has anyone else had something like this happen as a kid? Someone who could be real, but might not have been? A place that exists but doesn't? Also, if anyone has any insight into what this kind of experience could mean, I'd love to hear it. Was it just a strange childhood encounter? A warning? A sign? Or something that doesn't fit into any explanation? I still don't really know how to process it. My paranormal experience. When I was 14 years old, my two sisters, 6 years old and 15 years old, and I were in our small apartment watching TV when suddenly, out of nowhere and without experiencing any prior warnings, the entire apartment began to rattle and shake, like the biggest earthquake minus the ground moving. We had this hole in the ceiling that was covered by a board, and the board was levitating up and down. When I saw that, my mind immediately thought, oh, a homeless person or maintenance man is up there and is trying to come down. Not a logical explanation, but that's the conclusion my mind came to seconds into this event. Our dog became agitated and barked at my mother's room door, which was shaking violently. We all ran out of the house, but the dog was still inside, so my older sister ran back in to get him. The total time this happened was likely 40 seconds. And just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. It was night and cold outside, so we had no option but to go back inside. I can't remember how we just went about our lives after that or how we even were able to sleep in that house again. Mom was very unprotective, so we probably didn't even tell her. I now think back to this experience constantly, and I'm 36 now. To me, this experience serves as undeniable evidence of something beyond our understanding, which terrifies me deeply. Over the years, some people have suggested that we experienced an earthquake, but that is not true because the house did not move or shake, only the items, such as doors and windows, rattled. We were also born and raised in a country that experienced earthquakes and know very well how they feel. If this had been an earthquake, it would have made news in the US. There was no coverage of an earthquake on the news. Ghostly figures with bright orbs, white hoodies, black pants, and no faces are multiplied in dark woods. A few months ago I experienced a couple weird, crazy experiences at a friend's house out of state when visiting for a week. One night we were partying for a couple days, no alcohol, just a little weed and a couple lines of coffee powder. So I was up for 2 days and also detoxing from a 10-year use of heroin but had been weaning my use down day by day before this, into my 5-day detox with no H. At all, and wasn't feeling really that bad, not like the first 3 times of trying to quit, which were miserable. But this time it wasn't that bad at all, and I had all my senses and mind working okay, almost normally. Let me tell you a little about me before I go on about my experience so you don't get the wrong impression of me. I'm a 56-year-old businessman who has owned a well-known construction company for over 30 years of top-quality work with a professional, well-skilled master builder with 47 years of experience. Never had an unsatisfied customer ever, always satisfied, always guaranteed. I was married for 33 years, raised 2 children, and had a fulfilling life. I've been taking drugs for over 43 years. And kept them from intruding in my life, where responsibilities and family always came first, so my habit is not an issue. I've always helped and defended and protected the underdog and those in need no matter what. The last 6 years, I've dedicated full time to helping others in need. I'm not a saint, but I'm not a fool either. But now back to my experience. On the second night, feeling wide awake and a bit bored, I went outside around 10 p.m. While checking out the stars like I always do, I saw lights. I thought it was people in the woods. So I went closer to the woodline to see who the hell is in the woods this time of night. While sitting by a tree, I watched these different lights all around me. Now, like 6 to 9 lights about 3 feet off the ground, moving towards me and stopping 20 feet or so away from me. It felt kind of scary, so I moved to a different location in the woods away from the house, and they seemed to follow me and stop at a close distance from me again. It spooked me. So I moved further and further into the woods. My path back to the house was blocked by these lights, and in their glow, I could see a faint figure wearing black pants and a white hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, but I couldn't see any faces or feet. So this went on with them following me and me moving even further into the woods all night till morning. When the sun came out, there was nothing, so I thought I lost them, and they gave up. So thank God I'm an experienced hunter and have been in the woods my whole life. So I didn't panic and knew how to get back to the house, and I've been in these woods before. It helped. So I got back to find my friends wondering where the hell I was at. They were looking all night for me. So that night I got some sleep. I brushed off the experience as a hallucination caused by everything happening at the time. Then another friend stopped by and needed some help at his place. He lived 50 miles away, so I went with him, and although we parted ways briefly, it was nothing significant. And after we were done working, we decided to take a little stroll in the woods behind his house. It was almost nighttime, so we had a couple of flashlights on us too. About a quarter mile in, it was dark, but the moon provided some light. We started heading back. Now his light went dead, but he knew the woods there well. He's 15 years younger, so his pace was faster than mine, so he was further ahead of me but could see my light and knew I was right behind him going the right way. Then I started seeing the lights again all around me. I saw about 12 to 16 lights coming at me from different directions. Some stopped about 50 yards away, while others approached closer, within 18 to 20 yards. This time, I turned off my light, sat on a log to rest, and watched all the lights. Essentially, when I refer to lights, I believe they were individuals walking around with flashlights held at waist level, emitting a bright white light. The initial occurrence featured a few orange lights, however, this time, all the lights were white and bright. I sat there for about 15 minutes watching these lights come closer from all directions. Some stopped at a distance, some came closer, and then when they got 20 yards and closer, I could see a figure in a white hooded shirt, hood overhead and little of the top of the face, if it had one, visible. With black paints and no feet or faces or hands. With the light at their belly height. Then one of them came so close, like 10 feet in front of me, and stopped and just stayed there all quiet for a minute or two, saying nothing, just standing there facing me. I was a little shaken up and started talking to it, and nothing came back from it, and I looked to my left, where another one was standing sideways to me about 20 feet away, just standing there facing the same way I am, all quiet and not moving, looking the same as the one in front of me and a few others that are close all around me. I was becoming increasingly frustrated because these creatures were not responding to me. They were simply standing all around, some facing me and others facing different directions, with a couple of them positioned side by side at a distance that my flashlight could barely reach. So after yelling at the one closest to me for not answering me back for a couple of minutes, and the whole time I still see flashlights coming from far away, coming closer, then about 60 yards out I hear my friend calling for me, so I instantly call out, "Over here," then turn my flashlight back on, pointing it at the figure 10 feet in front of me standing, and as soon as I turned it on, there was nothing there, so I scanned all around me with my light, and nothing. All figures and lights were gone except my buddy's light coming at me. He said he was 20 feet in front of me at the time we got separated, and he went down a hill and then turned around, and my light was gone, so he made it back and grabbed another flashlight and came back looking for me. Now it sounds like I was hallucinating or under the influence of drugs, but I have been much higher before, and I have never had an experience that felt so real and looked so authentic. I've looked up a few things about it. But nothing exactly like I've experienced, and I wonder if somebody has any knowledge about what might have happened to me a month and a half ago. The one time I saw something. Where I grew up, my neighborhood had this one road that would lead to a series of desolate dirt roads that would break off in all directions that could go on for miles and miles, no houses or lights, very rural and isolated. My buddies and I would cruise up and down these roads on almost a daily basis, smoking, drinking, and shooting guns, typical teenage bullshit when you don't have a job or shit to do. We used to just call them the back roads. I had ventured out there countless times, regardless of the hour, whether it was 3, 4, or 5 a.m. We would sometimes just pull over and hang out, like I said, usually drinking and smoking weed. Shit, sometimes if I had nowhere to take a girl, I'd take her out there in the middle of the night, randomly pull over, and chill in the car. So my main point is I was out there a lot and never saw anything except for this one random night. My homie scooped me up like any other day and said, "Hey, I got a blunt, let's cruise back roads." I remember it not really being that late, maybe 8 or 9-ish. cruising slowly down a road we've been down many times, not really talking, just listening to music and passing the blunt back and forth. This was a long time ago, so it was just Reggie, not the crazy shit that's out now. So yes, I was high, but nothing out of the usual. We smoked every day, so we had a pretty high tolerance back then. If anything, we had just lit the blunt. We're going down a long, straight road for a while, so I'm just looking straight ahead. It's a very clear night. I recall the moon looking really full, so it was brighter than usual. As I'm looking forward, I notice further down the road fog starting to appear out of nowhere. It was very random, but I didn't really think much of it. It's still a distance away as we're getting closer, and I notice, in the only way I can describe it, a big black floating blob/cloud looking entity literally floating in the middle of the fog, making its way across the street as if it had somewhere to go. As it crossed the road, all the fog followed along with it, and it all just disappeared and went back to a clear, bright night. My immediate thoughts were to rationalize what I saw. I didn't immediately think it was anything supernatural. I thought, okay, maybe weather related, but it was a really nice night out. It didn't make sense. I then considered the possibility that someone was burning trash outside, but since I had seen fires in that area before, I knew what they looked like, so that explanation didn't fit. My mind is just running through 1,000 scenarios as to what the hell I just saw. My friend and I still hadn't said one word yet to each other. I was too busy trying to rationalize the whole thing. I wasn't even sure if he saw what I saw. Eventually he leans over and says, "Hey, did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, bro, what was it?" He immediately says, "A ducking ghost. Let's get the duck out of here." We made a right and hit the main street back to our neighborhood. We've never really talked about it since, and I never really told anyone about this. This happened about 20 years ago, and it's been on my mind a lot lately. I'm still trying to come up with a rational explanation for what I saw. If anyone has any ideas, I'm very open to hearing them. I need to share this ghost story with you. A few days ago, my girlfriend and I attended a family meeting at her sister's house. We had a great time, but I found myself questioning a few things, including the cemetery located 100 feet, approximately 30 meters, away from the house. I cracked one or two jokes about ghosts, but the atmosphere didn't follow my vibe. My girlfriend told me then that for a long time she had been seeing ghosts in the house, and her sister told me she had seen it too. This is how their story goes, and it is fascinating. 15 to 20 years ago, my GF was like 10, and her sister was in her early 20s. Sis was living 2 blocks from the main house, near the cemetery. It was her father's old house. As GF had bad times as a kid in the main house often, she was escaping to Sis for sleepovers, and over some time they were sleeping together in the same bed when she was seeing a real woman in white with white hair and a young face sitting just a few feet away on a chair and looking at her. After a few nights, she asked her sister, "What is that in the chair?" And Sis was petrified with questions because she had been seeing that same woman for months, maybe even years, often in a chair. Imagine, she was ignoring it. God knows how. They were speaking to me in one breath about how women looked, and the details were absolutely the same and incredibly detailed. Ghost didn't bother sister, but it did bother my GF. She was sitting on her back when she was sleeping face down on chests. One time Sis literally kicked my GF out of bed to turn on the lights, and the ghost just disappeared. I don't remember why the ghost stopped appearing daily, but it was gone for years. My girlfriend had already left the house when my sister saw the ghost again. She ignored it and never mentioned it afterwards. When Sis was 32, she was with an old neighbor going through pictures, and in them, she saw the ghost from the chair. She literally started crying and shaking, and believe me, she is a strong woman. Her question, "Who is that?" received an incredible answer. That is the first wife of your dad, who fell from the balcony where you sleep now when the house was in construction and she was pregnant. She is buried in the cemetery near the house. She hit her head with leftover cement. Her dad never told her about the death of his first wife. He had 3. Sis went to church and asked what to do, and they instructed her to light up a candle on the grave. She did it as told, and that was the end of ghosts. I usually never believe in ghost stories, but witnessing 2 people that I know talk to me about the same thing simultaneously changed my mind. I had always wondered why my girlfriend was interested in the zodiac and the paranormal, as this interest seemed very out of her character. Thanks for listening. I will answer any question, and you are welcome to share it. Ghosts are not here to stay, but something is keeping them. I have a few stories. Let me paraphrase first that I generally don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. I'm one of those gotta see it to believe it folks. That is because I grew up in Luxembourg in a house that was built in the 1600s and that is known to have a ghost, according to the surrounding villages. My grandpa's side has passed down this house for generations, and my dad also grew up there. And there have apparently been known sightings of a person appearing very randomly on the property over the decades, who, during the last known sighting, was determined to be a woman. The first story recounts the last known ghost sighting. When my dad was 18 to 20 years old, he invited a bunch of his friends to have a guy night while his mom was away. My grandpa had died a long time ago already by that time. He died when my dad was 9. Anyway, at some point during the evening, one of his buddies, Graham, suddenly had to rush to the bathroom. For some reason, he decided to use the one located upstairs and so ran up the long wooden spiral staircase that leads from the cellar to the attic. The house is massive and has 4 levels above ground, with a double attic right under the roof. Apparently, while running up the stairs, he ran into some lady who was just standing there in one of the curves of the staircase. He said she let out a very loud and offended, "Uck," and flailed her arms at him, like she was angrily gesturing to him, "Watch where you're going, punk," as he bumped into her. Graham was now really this close to peeing himself, so he barely looked at her and just said a quick, "Oh, sorry." He made a final desperate attempt to reach the bathroom. Once finally relieved, he realized how rude he had been to what he could only assume was my grandma. He knew my dad didn't have a sister, so he thought it must have been her. He went to my dad to tell him he might have pissed off his mom and wanted him to let her know he was sorry. My dad then let him know that my grandma was out of the country for a few days and nobody but them was supposed to be here. Since Graham was completely certain about what he saw, especially because the person he encountered spoke to him and gestured with their arms, my dad began to panic, fearing that an intruder was hiding in his parents' house. So he, Graham, and their buddies looked all over the house, checked the attics, the cellars, the barns, and the old stables, checked each room, wardrobe, and under the beds, and checked the gardens and the well around the house. Nothing. To this day, we still don't know whether the entity was the ghost that older villagers claimed haunted the house or if it was an actual intruder. I actually got to meet Graham when I was around 14 years old, and he will tell you the story with wide open eyes, still absolutely convinced he ran into someone in the long spiral staircase that night. I for one don't know if the story is true. From what I can assume, Graham was probably absolutely trashed out of his mind when he went up those stairs. My dad agrees somewhat that that was probably it and that he imagined things. I grew up and lived in this house for 25 years, but I never witnessed a full apparition or experienced anything strange, at least not anything I can't somewhat explain. Story 2, Shadow People at an Animal Sanctuary in Cornwall, UK. After graduating uni in my home country, I decided to pursue another degree in the UK. After that degree, I decided to stick around and explore the UK a bit longer before returning home. I went on to volunteer at a monkey sanctuary in Cornwall, which apparently is also known to be haunted. I lived on the property for a whole year while volunteering. The gift shop provided me with a room that I shared with other volunteers. During that year, I saw many volunteers come and go. Every other week, new faces would arrive and people who finished their volunteering stay would leave. Anyway, I remember one girl who was there for a couple of months. During that time, she took the bunk bed right underneath me. One morning she woke me up bright and early, super upset and sweating and yelling at me. "I saw people last night." Obviously, I asked her what she meant, and she said that sometime last night, she suddenly woke up for some reason, and she saw 2 people standing by our beds. One tall, dark figure that resembled a man wearing a straw hat or a wide-brimmed hat, and one smaller figure about the size of a small child, were present. She said they were just standing there right next to her. She immediately hid under her blankets, terrified, and didn't dare to look again until she could tell the sun was coming up. I didn't really believe her, to be honest. By that point, I had been living here for a few months and had never seen anything. I also assumed if this place was really haunted, there'd be more stories from volunteers or workers seeing things as well. I told her that next time she sees these shadowy people, to knock the bottom of my bunk to wake me up so I could take a look. She never knocked on my bunk, thank God. Although I would love to see proof that ghosts exist, I also think I would have a heart attack if I woke up to see dark figures standing in front of me in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I finished my year of volunteering without hearing any more stories. I was approximately 5 or 6 years old and was playing alone by the creek in my backyard. I remember seeing this wasp and starting to run from it. I had to go across the creek to get away, and there was this one set of rocks I'd normally hop across to get to the other side. One of those rocks was always really slippery and wet, and as I was running across it, I started to slip and fall, and the wasp was maybe 3 feet away from me. I remember feeling this hand grab my right foot and steady me. I could feel the fingers and thumb grab me and steady me, and right as that happened, the wasp did a 180 and just flew away after chasing me, which isn't typical for wasp behavior. The feeling of the hand on my foot wasn't scary. It was calming. I can still feel it if I think about it. There had been other paranormal activity at my house before that, though I don't remember any of it myself. I only know about it because of my family telling stories. There was some entity that watched out for my brother and me when we lived there, and I think whatever it was came to my rescue that day. An experience I had as a child. Were these ghosts, and was there something more malicious about this place? The house that appears in my mind at night. Ghosts? Or something more malicious, too? I want to set the tone for this. I was merely 6 years old, but I can remember these events as clear as day. My hometown was hit by a very bad tornado that I was at the apex of. It was right over our homes and tore off the neighbor's roof. A child my age could not easily forget the sound of a steam engine chugging in my ears as it hovered right above us and my mom praying to God. However, everyone also remembered the drive through the storm to reach the safety of a relative's home. We were lucky enough to drive to a home of a relative that night. The storm wreaked its havoc everywhere. The playground and park I used to play in were all but destroyed. A neighbor's boat was flung and had crushed our fence. A man tragically lost his life when the gas lines broke, causing his house to explode. We had to evacuate with the fear that everything would suddenly go down in flames at any moment. But flash forward about a week later. I was in the back of my stepfather's Tahoe. He was at work using his brother's car, as my mother's car was completely destroyed during the storm. We go to look at houses. This old fixer-upper of a home was located up on the hill overlooking the river, although the view of the river was obscured by trees. It was midday. The sun was out and the road was fairly quiet. Mom had heated up some Dino nuggets for me in a Tupperware container and kept them in a lunchbox to preserve their warmth. By the time I opened the Dino nuggets in the car to start eating, they were a bit lukewarm, especially after we stopped at a local Exxon gas station to get food. I, of course, begged my mother to get my ODHD, my most recent food obsession. Onions. With my small bag of Funyuns opened in the back seat, my mother ascended the hill to the house. It was a wooden lake house-style home, fairly big with 2 stories with a detached garage. It was surrounded by trees that were downed by the storm that was a week ago at this point. But the house looked like it had sustained more damage than just that of a storm. My mother drove up in my stepfather's Tahoe. Though I was only a 6-year-old, I immediately noticed the house was in ruins. To this day, I vividly remember the large hole on the left side of the roof, a gap extending down through the 2nd story of the building and into the 1st. Mom parked on the outside and told me that she was going to go and look at the house and see how much fixing up could be done or demolish the house on the lot to get a new one. She told me that I could come in and explore, as I love to explore around the area. Mom walked in ahead of me, and so I grabbed my little sippy cup and stuffed rabbit. But something strange happened the minute I opened the car door. So to preface this, parts of the inside of this house were completely exposed. This neighborhood was still empty post-tornado, and this house was the only one on top of the hill. My mom, my stepfather's Tahoe, and I were the only things here. But the minute I stepped out of that Tahoe, something wasn't right. It felt like time froze. The area had this eerie stillness to it. The ground was littered with leaves, as this happened in the autumn, but not a single leaf fell from any tree. There appeared to be no animals present, and all sounds suddenly ceased. The silence was deafening as I stepped with 2 of my little feet onto the grass. I can't describe what gripped me. But it was first this feeling of wrong. Something here was just wrong. I wanted to take a step forward to explore, but it felt like my feet just wouldn't move. It was cold. But not a kind of cold that comes naturally in the wind. It was a dead stillness that just hit me. I started to cry, something I never did that young. I just didn't know what to do. It felt so wrong, and I just wanted out of there. It felt like something wanted me gone, that something terrible had happened here. I began to sob as I felt this. An overwhelming amount of grief and despair hit me, like whatever happened here, whoever it was would never be happy again. I was getting worried about my mother's safety, so I slowly staggered across the leaves. But as I slowly walked, 1 foot in front of the other, everything just started feeling more and more wrong, just not right. I had rounded the back corner of the house to notice a murky swimming pool of pitch black water. At this point my body physically wouldn't let me take any more steps forward, and I started to cry and bawl, turning around and making a break away from the house. As I cried, I noticed a woman. A woman in white and blue. She was wearing a long dress and strode over from the direction my mom went in. But she wasn't my mother. My mother wasn't wearing a gown. She saw I was crying and felt me pulled against her. She asked me what was wrong, and I merely said, "Something is wrong with that house. I want to go home." I remember hearing gentle shushing in my ears as she hugged me, and I accepted her embrace. She asked me where my mother was, and I told her, "She's looking around the house." I started to get concerned and tried to pull away from the woman, and I tugged on the hem of her gown, which seemed to be a basic evening gown. I told her, "I need to go get mommy." But she leant down in front of me and said, "Sweetie, you can't go in there. It's not safe. You wait here. My daughter will keep you company. You can play with her." I listened to her and started to get back into the backseat. But I was too short to usually make it back into the Tahoe on my own. But as I climbed, I felt something pushing my butt back into it. I don't know how, but I was back in the seat, and beside me was a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. She seemed to be wearing a little skirt and a ruffled top. I, being a soft, sensitive boy, offered to play with her. And so I played to get my mind off of the house. Eventually my mom came running back when she heard my cries, and I begged her to leave this house and told her that we can't be here. My mother didn't understand but wanted to calm my fear and decided that this house wasn't worth it. She told me she'd take me back home. I asked her, "What about my new friend?" My mother looked confused as to what I was talking about when I gestured to the backseat. The girl was gone. But the seatbelt was still buckled. I still have vivid scenes of this house from time to time. I always want to go inside and explore it. But the woman always grabs me by the waist and takes me back to the car. So, did I see a ghost/ghosts? And why did she not want me to enter the house? My mom accidentally caused a haunting. Hello, I am fairly new here, and I love your stories. I would like to share my previous experience with the paranormal as well. Over time, my mother caused our family home to have a spirit. So my experience with the supernatural starts with the unexpected death of my grandma from my mother's side. When I was in the 6th grade, I had to go see my family in Mexico for what had been about 4 years since our last visit. I saw my cousins, uncles, aunts, and other family friends. They knew my grandma and helped my mom and her family prepare her old house for sale to anyone interested. After my grandma's funeral and our travel from La Mirada, Mexico, back to my home, I noticed for the first time ever my mom was stricken with grief. She cried day and night. I would come home from school, and my dad had to take me to my aunt's house, which lives close to us, to spend my afternoon there, since he didn't want to see my mom crying and not be her usual self. My mom ended up going through some items of my grandma's that were mainly photos, knickknacks, and clothes that belonged to my grandmother. At that moment, she discovered a book featuring an eye in the center of a pyramid, which was entirely in Spanish, so I couldn't understand its contents. My mom told me the book was about how to contact the dead. So my mother started to read how to talk to my grandma. I remember the majority of the time she would burn a candle, say some words, and then she would not say anything. For 2 nights, she performed this ritual without any significant response, knock, or murmur to fulfill my mom's wishes. Before the events, we had hung photos of all the dead family members on our wall, including grandma's, by the crucifix in the living room. Next to a crucifix that we have in the living room, we placed my grandma's photo. My mom did her ritual. It was 10 at night when we started to hear banging. My dad went to see what was happening, and he found my grandma's photo flung from the wall to the middle of the living room, where it was broken. This obviously scared my mom and dad, as they are superstitious and religious. However, my dad attributed it to the possibility that the photo rolled over and was knocked down by the strong air from our AC, but if that was the case, why didn't the other pictures fall over? Plus these weren't normal small thuds. They were banging, like someone hitting the wall with their fist. My parents fixed the photo of my grandma and reinforced all the pictures with better nails. My mom is still trying to talk to someone. She tried to talk to my grandpa. I don't understand why she switched up, but my grandpa died exactly 2 years before my grandma, so she wanted to try him next. That's when that same night we all heard a bang on the wall and then the sound of glass shattering, and it was my grandpa's photo with the nail still stuck on the wall and his picture further closer towards the left side of the living room, closer to my parents' bedroom. My mom had enough and got rid of the book. But the occurrences were far from over. I started to hear my name being called out more. I swear it was being called by my mom even if she was not home. I heard the voice call my name from my dad, but he was sleeping when I went to look for him in his bedroom, so it couldn't have been him. I thought maybe it was just me being a kid and having selective hearing and thinking I am being called. Until my parents left for one night for a couples therapy session with my church that lasts from 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock. I was alone with no supervision at home, which was usually when I'd watch movies or play extra hours of video games. Well, I finished watching X-Men on DVD in my living room. I turned off the lights and proceeded to look at Vines on my iPod when I had a sudden chill as if someone were watching me. I hear noises and proceed to call my parents from our home phone to come back home. I then see the chairs move and push against me as if trying to throw me down. The swiveling chairs of the kitchen that's close to the living room get knocked over. My mom's voice fades into the background, filled with pure horror at what I'm witnessing, which feels straight out of Poltergeist, and then I hear my name being called. I look to my left, and there it was, a spirit. It looked like my grandma, but I've seen too many horror movies to know that's not my grandma. So I book it and run to my parents' room. Scared shitless, I drop the home phone, it breaks, and I lock the bedroom door and hear banging coming from the door. After what felt like the longest minute ever, the banging finally stops. Then my parents, after 9 minutes pass, finally come home. They don't see anyone but a large mess and their child, who was scared out of their mind, hyperventilating and crying from the sheer terror of witnessing a literal apparition. I had nightmares after that event. I had frightening nightmares that were about me and other versions of myself. Chasing me in a forest of gray mists, they would catch me and do nasty and terrible things to me. I won't go into detail about those events because I want to keep this story safe for work, SFW. But after these nightmares and events, my uncle, who is a shaman or curandero in our Mexican culture, blessed our house. Blessed our house and rubbed eggs on us, and we saw the yolks turn black, and our church's priest came to bless our home, and we never had any problems with spirits afterwards. I did find that book years later, but remembering those events, I just burned it. I used it for kindling for a bonfire my friends and I had in 2017. What could the spirit have been, as I have not received any answers regarding this matter after 14 years. I was in the military, working security at this building that used to be an old hospital in the 50s. So, with multiple deaths on site, etc., the building was converted into base HQ, with lots of stories from outgoing posts about elevators opening up at night and nobody being there. I heard stories about hearing women screaming on the old maternity ward, and children can be heard running around. Anyways, here's my personal experience. I'm working an evening shift, so it's probably 9:30. So, we walk around the building twice a shift to make sure all doors that are supposed to be locked are locked, always in pairs of 2. Some doors require a signature because, you know, military and all. I always got creeped out in this one particular hallway. It had 5 of those papers we needed to sign. To get to this wing, you need key card access and a code. 2 of the papers needing signing are right past the doors, so my buddy hits those, and I proceed to the next ones. It's an L-shaped hallway, so I make my turn and start toward the next door needing signing when I feel my buddy grab my arm. Wondering what he wanted, I turned around only to find nobody standing behind me. I freaked out and went to tell him what happened. He pretended not to care, but I could tell he was just as shook as I was. Floating eyes on the second floor. Hello guys. I have had many strange paranormal events happen in my life. The one I will share with you today is the first paranormal incident that I had ever experienced. My father shared the backstory of the house with me, which I will also share with you. My father, mother, and my older sister were living in a 1-bedroom apartment at this time. My sister was only about 2 years old at the time, and my mother was pregnant with me and my brother. Yes, I am a twin. My father went searching for houses to buy because his family was growing and he wanted everyone to be comfortable when I and my brother came into the world. So he ended up spotting an old house that was a pretty decent size with a nice backyard in a very nice neighborhood. He didn't care that the house was old because he could always renovate. He saw the for sale sign on the house, and he realized the house was going for really cheap. He ended up knocking on the door, and out came an older man. They had a nice conversation and agreed on a price that suited both of them. My mother ended up giving birth to us days after the deal. So it was perfect timing. Since the house was old, my father did a couple quick fixes so that it was suitable for me, my sister, and my twin brother. My father had moved everyone into the new house a few days later after we were born. He and my mother were extremely happy with the size of the house and the price they got it for. He told me that on the first day he moved in, he planned to take time off work to settle in with everyone and help my mother, who had just given birth to us. She said he didn't have to worry about anything. That she and we will be alright. She insisted he go to work. So come the night he leaves for work. Now my mother stood up late in the night, placing furniture the way she wanted, putting stuff away, and cleaning the house. The house was a 2-family house with a basement. So the first floor is where they moved into. Now I, my twin brother, and sister were in one room together while my mother was putting away a box. My mother said she started to hear creaking on the second floor in the living room area. Then all of a sudden, she heard someone running and then loud banging. Now her instant reaction was someone's in the house. She ended up dropping everything and ran to the room we were in and locked the door. She ended up calling my father. What's crazy about this is that my father was literally having a conversation with police officers about something that happened to a patient in the hospital. Now my father gets the call, and he explains to the officers what's going on. My father, along with the officers, takes off to the house. The officers actually radioed and dispatched more officers who were in the vicinity of the house. The police entered the house and cleared every space. From the attic to the basement. There was no one in the house, so my father ended up using his vacation days early to help my mother finish settling in. Eventually my mother and father became friends with some of the neighbors on the block. My father mentioned that he and my mother were speaking with multiple neighbors outside when the incident involving the police was discussed. Incidents like this were rare in this neighborhood. My mother told them what happened to her that night. The neighbors ended up telling them that before you guys moved into the house, an older woman used to live there. Her brother used to always come down and check up on her to make sure she was okay. This was the old man my father met, and he had made the deal with. Now a couple weeks before you guys moved into the house, her brother came down like he always does and found her dead on the second floor. My mother and father looked surprised because the old man didn't mention this to them. My parents didn't take anything to heart because they too have lost someone in their family. My parents weren't going to move all because of one little incident. They are the type of people to stick things out. No one was harmed during the incident, so they figured whatever was there wasn't evil. It was just making its presence known. Let's fast forward to a couple years later. Now I think it was around wintertime in 2004. I'm not sure of the month. I was about 6 years old. I remember my two older girl cousins had come over to hang out. One was 16 and the other one was 18. My mother and father were talking to them and explaining they were going out and if they could babysit us. My cousins said yes because they were going to sleep over anyway. Now it wasn't just me, my twin brother, and my older sister anymore. My mother had about 4 more kids in between those years. So I remember my father and mother leaving. We were all watching TV in the living room, and a good amount of time had passed. Suddenly, my twin brother, my 2 cousins, and I heard a banging noise coming from the second floor. The banging was right on top of us. We also started hearing footsteps and creaking as well. My cousins looked at each other and had a puzzled look on their face. They told us to stay where we were, they were going to check upstairs real quick. So I see them walk out the living room door and close it. A couple of minutes pass by and we start hearing both of them scream like they were being ended. My twin brother opens the door, and I follow him, and we get to about halfway into the hallway near the stairs. We start seeing our 2 cousins sprinting down the stairs and screaming in fear, saying, "Don't go upstairs. Get in the house. There's something upstairs." They both had lost their minds. Now my brother and I were in the hallway already. We had seen them take out their phones and call our parents. This is 2004, guys. They had little Nokia phones. They then grabbed my older sister and younger siblings and took them all into the bathroom and locked the door. They yelled at me and my twin brother to come inside, but we wouldn't listen. I could hear them talking to my parents on the phone from inside the bathroom. I wasn't scared at all. Nor was my twin brother. We looked at each other like, what the hell was that about? Also, we grew up with an older sister. So we know girls can sometimes overreact. At least our sister did most of the time. So my brother said, "Let's go check it out." I smiled at him and said, "Okay." The hallway is about 25 feet long. Now where we were standing is almost near the entrance of the stairs. Now the stairs going up to the second floor are about 10 feet long. So here goes my brother heading up the stairs and me tagging along right behind him. My brother was about 4 steps away from the top of the stairs. I was 2 steps behind him. We could see that the door to the entrance of the second floor apartment was opened about a quarter of the way. But the lights were all off inside of the apartment. We could see everything clearly in the hallway because the hallway lights were on. Then out of nowhere we saw these huge eyes swoop down underneath the top of the doorframe to come into the hallway of the second floor. Much like how when a basketball player ducks his head under the door because he's so tall. But it moved with an unnatural speed. However, the strange part was that there was neither a head nor a body present. It was just these 2 huge floating almond-shaped neon green and yellow eyes. The eyes weren't floating, though. They appeared to be floating. It looked like they were set on a head, but the head and body had to be invisible because we could see through it like it was translucent. But after it swooped under the top of the doorframe, it headed towards the stairs close to my brother. The way this thing moved was weird too. It was swaying side to side and walking at the same time. Have you ever seen the cat from the movie Alice in Wonderland? How can he be invisible, but his eyes and mouth just appear? It was just like that. Whatever this was, it was tall as hell too. The eyes were above the height of the doorframe. After it came close to my brother by the top of the stairs, It just quickly turned around and, with such odd speed, swooped back down under the doorframe to enter back into the apartment. My brother and I didn't even know how to react. Throughout the whole experience, we didn't feel any type of fear. However, I was curious to enter the apartment and discover what it contained. However, I had a strong intuition that I should not enter the apartment. So my brother and I head back down the stairs and tell my cousins what we just saw. They are out of it. They don't even respond to us. My parents ended up coming back quickly, and they came back with the police. I remember the police checking the whole house and nothing. My cousins ended up going back home because they were too scared to stay in the house. That was just a weird experience. I don't know if it was a ghost, spirit, or demon. I seek answers because I have never been able to comprehend or identify what it is. If any of you have had an experience similar to this, please feel free to reach out. Thank you. Just to preface this story, it is true. I have had many paranormal experiences in my life. This is one of them. This is the one that is continuing. When I was 10 years old, my parents divorced, my mom remarried, and my mom, siblings, stepdad, and I moved into a new house. We lived in a little town in Ohio where the population was only about 50 people. When we first moved in, I could tell something wasn't right about the house. It was an old house, built in the late 1800s to early 1900s. The house sat on 10 acres of open land and an additional 45 on the vast wooded areas. A large red barn sat in the backyard. You could tell that no one had really taken care of it as the paint was chipping off in some parts. I considered that old houses settle, so I never minded the loud creaks in the hallways or even my door randomly opening. What I did mind was the shadow man standing in the doorway to the barn. Initially, I always thought it was merely my stepdad feeding the dogs or searching for something that had accidentally ended up in the barn. But one night, it all changed. The way the house was set up put my sisters and my bathroom right in front of the barn. One night my parents were out of town. All my siblings were asleep, and the only adult there was my grandmother, who was severely handicapped. I had just finished getting a shower when I happened to glance out the window. As I looked, I could see a large figure standing at the doorway of the barn. I quickly shut the curtains and hurried into my room. I tried to push the image out of my mind. I knew that if I talked to my mom and stepdad, they would just say that it was my eyes playing a trick on me. They would dismiss it as they had done on previous occasions when I mentioned the shadow man. I never told my siblings what I saw because they were all much younger than me. Fast forward 3 years. I was 13 at this point. My parents decided that since we lived in the country and had a barn and some wooded areas we could clear out, we would get a horse. At that point, my chore became feeding the horse in the morning before school, riding or leading after school, and feeding once more before I went to bed. I also took care of the dogs that we had, who were in the barn. One night, while walking to the barn to feed my horse, I shone my light at the barn but saw nothing. I felt safe. I climbed the steps to the hayloft and threw down a bale of hay. As I was coming back down the stairs, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure of a man. I quickly turned and shone my flashlight in the direction. Nothing was there. I wrote it off but quickly walked to the house. That's when things seemed to get even more scary. The next night, the same thing happened, and it continued to happen every night. But for the next few nights, it seemed that every time I looked out the bathroom window, the shadowy man was getting closer and closer to the house. I started seeing him when I went into the basement to do laundry. I started seeing him when I was waiting for the bus in the morning. I started to see him when I stayed the night somewhere else. Fast forward 4 years to when I was 17. My mom and my stepdad got divorced, and we moved out. We moved in with my grandpa, who lived in a brand new house that he had built. Every so often, when I was in my room and looked out the window, I saw him standing there, the shadow man, in my backyard, looking up at my window. I saw him when I moved into my first apartment. I saw him when I moved to a new house with my grandpa. When I relocated to my gated community in Florida from Ohio, I ran into him. I saw him at my first house I moved into. I'm 25 now and living in Florida. As I am typing this, I can see him standing just outside my window. I thought this would stop if I moved away. Changed my living arrangements multiple times, jumping from house to house. But it hasn't stopped. I see him everywhere. I see him in a dark parking lot and in my rearview mirror while I'm sitting at a stoplight. He is everywhere now. I don't know if I should tell my mom or if I should just let it be. All I know is he is everywhere, and my childhood demon never left me. Scariest thing that has happened to me. This happened to me around 3 years ago when I was 13. I honestly can't remember how long ago it happened. The time was around 7:30 at night, and I was having a blast constructing a new Lego set in my bedroom alone. I had the doors locked, and I was alone. My bed is in the middle of my room, and I have space on each side of it. I was sitting on the side farthest from the door. For some random reason, I always kept my Legos under my bed, and in this instance, I placed the pieces for the set down there. I needed to get more pieces for the set, so I took a look under my bed and reached for those pieces, but I all of a sudden just froze. On the other side of my bed, there were feet walking the length of my bed back and forth, very slowly and quietly. I quickly assumed it was my dad, but I remembered that he was at work, and they definitely didn't look like my dad's feet. The feet then stopped and faced me. At this point I'm shitting bricks and paralyzed in fear. I gathered up the courage and quickly got up and took a look, and to my shock, nothing. I looked under the bed again and everywhere but saw nothing. I run to my parents' room, where my mother is giving my sister a pedicure. I just sit down and don't mention anything. 30 seconds after I sit down, all of the power in the house goes out and the lights shut off. I didn't mention this to my parents for a couple of months, but they obviously brushed it off and didn't believe me. Something scary happened to my sister as well. This happened when she was in our bathroom. FYI, our bathroom has a massive mirror in front of the shower. She said she was getting undressed, and out of the corner of her eye while looking down, she saw a man right behind her staring at her through the mirror. She let out a horrible scream, and once she turned around, there was nothing. I remember running up the stairs and to the door to ask what was wrong, and she was sobbing. Really, to this day, nothing else has happened in my household. I hope nothing else happens. I wonder if it was always there or if my mother created it. November 13, 2011, is when my mom went crazy. My parents were married for 21 years. My mom has always had her demons, but for a long time she at least tried. Sometime in 2006 or 2007, after I went off to college, she went off her meds for depression. This time was different. I didn't realize what mania looked like at the time. I was only 18, but years later I realized she had an adult onset of bipolar disorder. It was unnerving. It was the last straw for my dad, and he left. The divorce was finalized in 2008. My mom was never the same. The combination of borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder, both diagnosed, meant watching her go up and down on a haunting roller coaster of destruction, which meant watching the small part of her that was a mother fade away. My dad left her the house. This is the house where I had lived for my entire life. It's a beautiful home, cozy and on the corner. There's a big bay window and natural light. It always felt like home until the divorce. I hated being in the house after my dad left. Her behavior became more erratic, and the lows became so much lower. And the house began to change. It was dark and stale. And you couldn't wait to leave. I have always attributed it to my perception as a young adult navigating a divorce and my mother's decline. But now, I don't know. It got worse and worse over time, and then I got the phone call on November 13, 2011. I was living in another city. The call was from my father, telling me a neighbor noticed he hadn't seen my dog in the bay window for several days, and decided to use the spare key my mother had given him. The dog was found dead in the bathroom, and my mother was in bed, weak and frail. She had lain in the bed for so long her leg muscles had atrophied. The dog, I've never been able to get answers on, but my sister once let it slip that there was blood. The cleaners my aunt hired to clean the house found my cat 3 days into the job, crushed to death between the ottoman and the chair in the back room. She spent the next few years in a catatonic state, first in the mental hospital, and then she was transferred to a nursing home. In the meantime, I was the one to clean up the house. She was a shopaholic hoarder, and mental illness had only amplified it. The first time I came back home, it felt dark and stale, but it was empty. It didn't have the panicked pressure that I had felt with my mother there. I sorted and cleaned. Sorted and cleaned. Sorted and cleaned. The more I did this, the lighter and brighter it became. Until it felt like home again. Not really, but kind of. There was always a little bit of staleness there. But I attributed, and perhaps still do, it to my subconscious awareness of what had happened there. One thing I observed about the house was its ability to transform from light to dark in an instant. And everything was gradual, if that makes sense. You never noticed things until you were consumed by the stale darkness. It was like a cloak coming over the place in one steady sweep. It was odd, but how can you explain it? I had a boyfriend. Our relationship wasn't exactly healthy to begin with. But I will say that he noticed the same things I did with the house. There were 3 specific incidents with that house. First incident. One day, it was me, him, and one of his friends sitting in the middle room when we heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. They went to go check, and it was closed, with no sign of being opened. The thing about the door is that, As it was old like the rest of the house, the door had become difficult to open and close. In order to open it, you had to put your shoulder into it. But in order to close it, you had to thrust your body weight against it several times before it would shut. We heard it open, but we never heard it shut. This was impossible. 3 people heard the exact same thing. The second incident. My ex and I were sitting in the middle room once again. We were in our office chairs at our desks talking about something when we distinctly heard several creaks overhead and a sudden smash, directly, and I mean directly, over my head in the attic. It sounded as if someone had taken several steps until they were directly overhead, then either dropped a plate or a glass bong, the very specific sound of glass shattering, with great force. The sound was so incredibly clear. My ex and I locked eyes with each other, and he whispered, "There's someone in the attic." I was gone. I ran to the garage, backed my car out, and parked it in the driveway. My ex came out to meet me and convinced me to stay where I was in the car as he called his best friend, the same one who heard the front door open/not open, and asked him to come with his gun so they could search the attic. His best friend arrived in less than 2 minutes, with his weapon. They both went inside the house and searched the place from top to bottom as I sat in the driveway. The way this home was set up was it was on a corner lot. The side gate faced the street, and there was a bay window that wrapped around the house and stretched almost to the front door. We still had the blinds pulled up. This meant that from my vantage point I could see inside half of the house, and if anyone exited through the only 2 exits in the home, the front door and side gate, I could even see the back fence from where I was. I would see them. I could even see the roof. It was not a large home. I would be able to see if anyone was making an escape. As I waited for the boys to return, I half expected to see a homeless man scramble out of the house. It was the only thing that could explain the sound of something being thrown right above my head. The boys completed the search of the home. Nothing and no one was to be found. I asked if they had checked the attic. Thoroughly, they said. I believe them. The thing about the attic of that house is that it wasn't a true attic. The rafters were set up in such a way that a person could not walk around freely up there. If they did, they would fall through the ceiling. There was a light switch up there, and the boys had examined every square inch of the attic. There was no sign of life to be found. No glass. Nothing. It would be easy to write it off as a strange sound the old house had made if it weren't for one thing my boyfriend was insistent on, the footsteps he had heard leading up to the crash. He was adamant. He had heard the footsteps above him as they walked to the spot right above me. He had heard the wood slightly creak as if it had lifted its arms up to throw something with force. I wear hearing aids, so I miss out on a lot of sounds. But I had heard creaking before the smash. And I knew by then when my boyfriend was being sincere. I believe him even to this day as to hearing those footsteps. The third incident. We were in the house for 2 or 3 years. I split my time between there and down south for college. My boyfriend stayed behind in the house. He would mention that there were times he just knew he wasn't alone. But no other specific incidents took place. The house began to get darker. Our fights grew worse and more violent. Something happened to my mind. It all happened gradually until it was horrible. A point of no return. To this day, the depression I felt there is like nothing I have ever experienced before. It changed me. After one particularly savage fight, I went for a drive and came back. I was alone, he was not there. I entered through the back door and was greeted by a wall of darkness. It was stale. Cold. Dark. Even though all the lights were on. You could barely breathe. I snapped. I yelled at the darkness in the kitchen, for no particular reason, "Get the duck out. Go away. I see you. Go. I'm sick of you." It retreated. I swear to you on my son, I visibly saw the darkness shift backward. I screamed at it some more. And it retreated some more. There was light again. The house was light and beautiful again. My memory stops there. In the kitchen, I was screaming at the darkness. Then I wake up in my bed. Fully clothed, on top of the sheets. The house is dark again. The staleness is there again. But when I walk into the kitchen, it is light and bright. Oddly enough, that was the first time I considered the possibility that there might be something more to the house. I began to wonder if there might be something otherworldly in the house. But what? Not too long after the incident in the kitchen, I left the house, and it was put up for sale. Since then, I have endured many tough and trying times, but none compare to the darkness, sluggishness, staleness, pressure, panic, hopelessness, bleakness, and agony of that home. My gut tells me that there's something there. My rationalism is willing to concede that it could all be subconsciously rooted in the pain associated with the home's history. But I feel that there truly is or was something dark and dangerous within the home. And I only wonder if it was there when my mother moved in with my father. I also wonder if she created this darkness through her downward spiral. I had a recurring dream while in that house. I would walk into the middle room and see something that resembled a cross between the creature from Alien and Predator. And it would lock eyes with me, and I would hear in my mind, "Widow Sullivan," and the dream would end. There is no one in my family with the name Sullivan. And I'm unsure if it's connected, probably not. But I never had that dream again after leaving the home.